a little bit differently from my colleagues, I don't see the major interest. I mean, I would count roughly a dozen times in last night's French debate where they talked about Poilievre overall. I don't see it going much beyond that tonight, because otherwise they're paying too much attention to the guy. You know, if your whole shtick is saying, we've got this great guy here, his name Carney, and he's going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, and guess what? He can get us out of this mess with the Americans. Then why do you keep talking about the guy who just lost his two main things, which is Trudeau and the carbon tax? Leave him alone. I mean, if there's something very specific that Canadians can understand, but otherwise, deal with him when the campaign comes.
Well, we shall see, right? In about 45 minutes' time. Scott, Lisa, and Tom are sticking around. Thank you for your generous amount of time throughout the evening. They're going to be here right before the debate and then throughout the debate and after as well. I'm going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, you heard some of our panelists talk about recent public opinion polling. Nick Nanos will join me live here in studio to talk more about that. Stay right there.
Businesses. We have problems, and it starts with homelessness and the lack of affordable housing, and that's what pushes people into criminal lifestyles. I don't.
Go ahead.
No, please allow me to finish.
What he's saying.
I'm not trying to blame people who have problems. We have to help them.
We all agree on Hamas, on a two-state
No, we don't agree with
solution.
Hamas. No, we're against Hamas.
All right, some highlights there from last night's French debate. Will we see any standout moments tonight when that debate gets underway in English in about 40 minutes' time from Montreal? And how could the latest federal polling impact things? Nick Nanos is Chief Data Scientist and founder of Nanos Research. He's live with us here in studio. Nick, good to see you. As always, you got some brand new numbers out today that are somewhat over the, my jaw has been dropping for 10 days over the numbers you've been putting out, and today it just kept going further down. Let's put them up to show people where things sit. You've got the Conservatives roughly around 37%.
Yep.
The Liberals roughly around 33%. The NDP at 16%. What does this say to you?
Well, what this says is that we're basically in a horse race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The Conservatives have been hemorrhaging support for the last 6 weeks, and the Liberals first picked up from the Conservatives. Now they're picking up from the New Democrats. The Liberals are up in the province of Quebec. They're tied with the Bloc Québécois in the province of Quebec. They're competitive again in Atlantic Canada. Actually, the one holdout province in our tracking is Ontario. The Conservatives still have about a 9 or 10 point advantage over the Liberals. That's probably the one piece of good news for Pierre Poilievre. But beyond that, it's bad news everywhere else for the Tories.
So let's talk a little bit, quantify a little bit of where this has gone over really just the last month. Because on January 14th, and you can correct me if I've got my numbers wrong, but you had the Tories at 47% and the Liberals at 20%. That is January 14th, just over a month ago.
Exactly. And what we've seen is basically support completely switch from the Conservatives to the Liberals. And let's face it, Vassy, when the Conservatives are at 47%, those aren't all Conservatives. There are Liberals in there. There are other people that are grumpy, and as a result, what we're seeing is those people coming back. And the new dynamic now is to watch the New Democrat support, because when the Conservatives were at 47 and the Liberals were at 20, it was like, okay, well, the election's over, might as well vote NDP, stick with the party. I think now that, for those progressive voters, it's kind of like the worst scenario for the Conservatives and the best scenario for the Liberals as the one party that can challenge Pierre Poilievre. But there's still a lot of time. And the other thing I'd like to say, when the numbers change this fast, they can change again.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Let me ask you for some historical perspective. Have you seen other examples of a swing like this in such a short duration of time? I mean, when you say just because it's swinging one way, it can swing the other, have you seen that happen as well?
Well, in the I was a younger lad then. The 1988 federal election, there was a massive swing in favor of Brian Mulroney in the close of the election. It was like 17 or 18 points within a couple of weeks. And this also speaks to elections matter. That's where you had like the dramatic debate. You had the showdown. Canadians were focused. That election is probably going to be a lot like this election. This election is going to be dominated by Trump in the United States. 1988 was dominated by our relationship with the United States and the proposed free trade agreement. So, maybe things are kind of lining up for those same type of scenarios.
And when we look ahead to that debate that's getting underway just about a half hour from now, we were just speaking with Tom and Scott and Lisa about, is this about talking to Liberal voters or is it about talking to Canadians more largely? What would you say on that?
Well, I think for Mark Carney, it's about talking to Canadians. Can I say something? I think Chrystia Freeland's the one to watch in this debate.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, she knifed Justin Trudeau. Then she ran for the leadership. She obviously has ambition, and she has to be disappointed. This debate is about her salvaging her reputation, because if not, she's going to be a footnote in political history as the former deputy prime minister, the former minister of finance, who took down a prime minister, ran for the leadership, and was rejected by her party.
So last night she didn't take a lot of jabs at Mark Carney. I would have anticipated more, particularly if you want to create like a space for yourself up against him. Do you think that changes tonight because it'll be in English? Or does it have to?
I don't know if it changes tonight, but she has to be thinking about her legacy and role within the party. And if she does not perform well in the leadership race, then her political capital is diminished, even if she wants to stay in politics. So she has to be also thinking about that. And there's nothing wrong, I think, at least, with leadership candidates challenging each other, right? Let's face it, if Mark Carney wants to be prime minister, he should be prepared to take a little heat, even if it's from his own team.
And when you look at the trajectory of where things are going, is it your view that is it the combination of Trudeau leaving and Trump arriving on the scene the way that he has, with the threats and with everything to do with Canada, that's led to this outcome, or is it something else?
It's those two things plus one other thing, and that being the Conservatives being flat-footed on the issue. It's kind of like they have a tin ear. They were still talking about carbon tax Carney and talking about his shoes and talking about other things when Canadians are worried about Donald Trump and the devastation that he might have on the Canadian economy. You know, they don't want to hear about those petty, cheap shots. They want to hear about substance, and I think.
They have moved to talk. I mean, they've put out a number of policies around the border, for example, around the economic policy they pursue in response to tariffs, should they be levied. Is any of that punching through at this point?
No, it's not punching through at all, and that's why we can see it in the numbers. You know, the other thing is that I think a lot of the positions between Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre are similar.
Very similar.
So it's like, okay, so we're going to have, you know, maybe the good news is Canada has a consensus on dealing with Donald Trump. And then for both Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, the bad news is they both agree on the same thing. People are going to, how are they going to pick? Based on character, based on personality, based on style, based on risk? We don't know that.
And what about when it comes to the timing of an election? Not that I would ask you to take out your crystal ball, but as you see the numbers where they are, as you see the issue set where it is, do you think that there is any chance this election happens, you know, after the summer into the fall, or is this thing happening pretty soon?
Well, if it doesn't happen soon, and say, why don't we assume that Mark Carney could win the Liberal leadership? So what is he going to do? Sit in the gallery and get punched in the face by Pierre Poilievre by recalling Parliament? I don't say this often. That would be a stupid move. I don't think it takes anyone sophisticated to figure that out. And, you know, why would the Liberals give Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative, who are experts and excellent in the House of Commons, the opportunity to take shots and to give them a platform to, you know, to take down Mark Carney? I think the Liberals want to at least show that they're in control and to take the risk. I won't say roll the dice, because I think another politician said roll the dice. Doesn't always work out that well.
We shall see, right? Coming up soon, I think. Thanks so much, Nick. I appreciate it. That's Nick Danos. He's also going to be with us after the debate for some of his analysis. He is, of course, the founder and chief data scientist of Nanos Research. We're going to take a quick commercial break on this special edition of Power Play. Lots more coverage ahead, including a breakdown of all the major policy positions for each of the candidates who will be up on that stage in just over half an hour's time. We're back in just a moment. Stay right there.
Now I'm in my 50s, I'm all about
and in the political world. So I think that's one of my greatest strengths.
Those are the candidates for the federal Liberal leadership. Their second and final debate, this one in English, gets underway in about half an hour, just under half an hour in Montreal. We're going to carry that live right here on CTV News Channel. We wanted in advance, though, to give you a quick recap of some of the policies that have been proposed so far. The threat, of course, of Donald Trump's tariffs have put Canada-U.S. relations at the top of the issue list. Here's what Mark Carney is proposing. He says that Canada should go for dollar retaliation, that we should remove interprovincial trade barriers and diversify exports, as well as use electricity exports for leverage. Chrystia Freeland, who led the federal government through NAFTA negotiations the first time around, says she would immediately publish dollar-for-dollar retaliation, the list of dollar-for-dollar retaliation, so the list of tariffs that would run counter to what Donald Trump is imposing. She would also, like Mark Carney, remove interprovincial barriers and diversify exports. She would also put a 100% tariff on Tesla vehicles. Tesla, of course, Elon Musk's company. Elon Musk is the head of Dodge and near Donald Trump quite often. Karina Gould, the former government House leader, has not gone as far, or Carney or Freeland, when it comes to retaliation. Instead, she said she would deploy a major Team Canada charm offensive. She would work to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers, just like the other two candidates, and exempt supply management from any future negotiation, something Chrystia Freeland also agrees with. Affordability is another dominant issue, and it will factor into tonight's debate. Here's what Mark Carney is promising. He says he'll introduce a middle-class tax cut, though we don't have the details on that exactly. He'll scrap the increase to capital gains inclusion rate that was introduced in the last budget. He would cap immigration and eliminate GST for first-time homebuyers on homes under $1 million. Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is proposing similar affordability measures. She says that she would cut the second income tax bracket from 20.5% to 19%. So that's people who have an income between $57,000 essentially and $114,000. She would scrap the increase to capital gains, the inclusion rate, the increase to the inclusion rate that she brought in the last budget. She would tie immigration to housing. That's something the federal Conservatives have promised to do as well. She would eliminate, and promised to do first, I should say, fairly. She said she would also eliminate GST for first-time homebuyers on homes up to $1.5 million. And former government House Leader Karina Gould says she's pledging to cut the GST by 1 point to 4%, keep GST off select children's items permanently, and that she would revisit the capital gains inclusion rate changes, plus establish a path to basic income, to a universal basic income program. The Liberals' controversial consumer carbon tax has also been front and center in this leadership campaign. Mark Carney says he's going to scrap it and replace it with green incentives. Chrystia Freeland says she will also scrap it, but consult with provinces and territories on an alternative. And Karina Gould says she will pause the next increase to the consumer carbon tax, but likely keep it going forward. She has not really been explicit about what would happen after that pause. Trump's presidency and pressure to boost defense spending has led to these pledges from the top three contenders. Mark Carney says he or his government would reach 2% of GDP on defense by the end of 2030. Chrystia Freeland says that if she were prime minister, she would pledge to hit that target by 2027. And that is something Karina Gould agrees with. She has put the same date on hitting that 2% target. I've got to take a quick break. On the other end of that break, the moderator of tonight's debate, Hannah Thibodeau, will give us a behind-the-scenes look at how things are unfolding on the set there. We're about 25 minutes away from tonight's Liberal leadership debate. We're back in a moment.
You know,
A little sampling of what we've heard so far from Liberal leadership candidates over the last month as this campaign got underway in earnest after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced he would resign back on January 6th. Tonight's debate gets underway in about 20 minutes. This is one of two debates. Last night, the French debate took place. Tonight, it's the English language debate. And then voting actually gets underway tomorrow, culminating on March 9th with the announcement of the new leader of the party and subsequently the person who will become prime minister for some amount of time until, of course, an election takes place. And then the election will determine ultimately if that person stays on or if someone else becomes prime minister. Like I said, the debate will take about 2 hours, a number of different topics covered. The moderator of tonight's debate is Hannah Thibodeau, and she gave us a behind-the-scenes look at how things are going to go down.
Hi, Vassy. Let me give you a sense of where this is taking place and a little idea of what you'll see tonight. If you look behind me, these are some of the movies that are filmed or have been filmed in these massive sets. Look, the terminal with Tom Hanks. But let's walk inside and we'll show you just how big this room is where the Liberal leadership debate, the English language debate, will take place tonight. In this studio you see behind me, that is the wall where you saw the big projection of the Liberal sign. You know who else filmed in this exact studio, Vassy? I think you'll find this interesting. Ryan Reynolds himself. Tonight, Ryan Reynolds will not be here, but as you see from the podiums up front, this was previously decided by a random draw. We have Karina Gould, Frank Baylis, Chrystia Freeland, and Mark Carney over here. So that will be the layout for this evening where you'll see the candidates during this English language debate. Flip over this way, and that is my seat. I will be moderating tonight. And again tonight, Vassy, we have the same four themes, that were decided by registered Liberals right across this country. That is Canada's place in the world, and of course that will focus on Donald Trump, President Donald Trump, and the threats to our sovereignty, as well as the 25% tariffs that are being threatened, and he threatened it again yesterday to follow through with it on March the 4th. And then we have the economy. That's a big issue for all of Canadians, talking about their pocketbooks, how we will see the future of Canada's economy. Affordability is also another part of these discussions. And then finally, we're going to end on climate change. The big thing for all of these candidates, I'm just going to show you this again because this is where they will all be standing. None of the candidates know what questions I will be asking. All of that will come out on the stage up there. We will have segments of 1 minute where they'll all get asked the exact same question and get to answer that for 1 minute. And then in those themes, there'll be 5-minute debates. And finally, we will have closing comments from each of the candidates here. Compare it to last night in the French debate, I expect this one might be amped up just a little bit more. The reason for that is because last night, most of the candidates weren't speaking in their mother tongue. They were speaking in French. And tonight, it will be the English debate. It's, yes, amongst family. That's what we heard from Chrystia Freeland last night, but I do expect it to be a bit more spicy. So 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. Hope everybody's watching. Vassy.
Thanks so much, Hannah. That's the moderator for tonight's debate, Hannah Thibodeau. As she mentioned, it gets underway at 8 o'clock, so about 17 or so minutes from now. We're going to carry it live right here on CTV News Channel. It lasts about 2 hours, and then following the debate, each of the candidates gets out and takes questions, or is supposed to get out and take questions from reporters. We're going to carry that live and have some post-debate analysis as well. I'll take a quick break at this moment. On the other end of that break, Scott Reed, Lisa Raitt, and Tom Mulcair are back to look ahead to what we may see. Stay right there.
My family came to call Canada home when I was a little girl. That home
preview on now.
Welcome back to a special edition of Power Play. We're just over 10 minutes away from the start of the Liberal leadership debate, and I believe we have, I think, a live shot inside the studio where that's about to take place. There are, if there is, I should say, there we are, a family handshake, a friendly handshake ahead of the debate. That is former Government House Leader Karina Gould on the far left, Frank Baylis, former Montreal area MP, to her right, Chrystia Freeland, the former Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, next to Frank Baylis. And then finally, that's former Bank of Canada and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney. That is the order that they will appear on stage in just over 10 minutes' time. And that debate is set to last 2 hours. It's going to cover 4 different kind of topics: Canada's place in the world, the economy, issues around affordability and housing, and then climate action. And it will be moderated, as you just saw in the last segment, by Hannah Thibodeau. I am joined now, once again, lucky me, by our panel to talk a bit more about what we might expect. CTV political commentator Scott Reid is here. He's a former communications director to Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is with us. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC, and CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is rounding us out this evening. Tom, I'll start with you. As we look at that shot of the friendly, very friendly handshake ahead of the start of the debate, what is, if you could single out, one thing you've got your eye on tonight, what is it?
Well, I've done a number of leaders' debates, and I can tell you that you're always a bit nervous. In the case of the debates within your own party, obviously, you don't want to make a mistake. You want to appear well for your members. You want to be respectful, but you also want to try to punch through. I know we try to avoid that type of image, but that's the idea. You want people to notice you above the other ones. And I'm very sensitive to what Scott Reid said in our earlier discussion when he said, you've got to avoid the temptation to prove that you're the smartest kid in the class. But at the same time, they're going to be discussing complex issues. And your ability to answer the question that's actually being asked, and there was a lot of avoiding that last night, by the way, in the French debate, and people are going to have to be on their toes and try to give an answer to the question that's being asked. That requires a deep knowledge. And I think we're lucky in Canada to have people who are so skilled and so deeply experienced that are able to offer themselves up, for this type of public service. But I'm going to be watching that. I'm going to watch whether or not they're able to continue to give complete answers to the questions that are asked, and they don't let the nervousness, because I don't care who you are. Vassy, this is a very important evening for all 4 of them, and they're going to be nervous.
Lisa, if I recall, I think it was you who said that both Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney shouldn't appear too smart or come across, come across in a certain way with respect to that. If you're going to identify one thing you're watching for tonight, what is it?
Well, they're all dressed alike, Vassy, so I hope that they actually don't sound alike for the entire thing. They look like the maitre d' staff at a high-end restaurant. They're all wearing the same uniform, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's the Conservative uniform. I would blend in really well myself with them this evening. But I do want them to touch on some serious issues. I want to hear what they would do different than a Trudeau government does. I mean, I think it's important for them to try to make some differentiation. I understand what Chrystia Freeland did yesterday and giving kudos and props to the Prime Minister, but the reality is that the Conservatives are going to run on the notion is that you're getting the same old, same old. There is no change here. It doesn't matter who you're putting in the front. It's exactly the same group of people that have brought you through what you've got in the last 10 years. And do you want that for another 4 years? And as a result, they're going to have to show a lot of differentiation from each other, from the party, I think, because clearly the polling up to this moment has indicated that Canadians may not have been thrilled with what the party's doing. And certainly the about faces on some of those big policy items from the last 10 years would indicate so.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, Scott, if they are challenged a little bit more on the, in particular, policies that they've rejected, that they were, some of them at least, supportive of under Justin Trudeau. There wasn't hardly any mudslinging's too generous a term, but there wasn't much pushback on Trudeau last night at all, to Lisa's point. Do you think that there will be more of that in some capacity tonight?
Not much. I think they'll try to contrast themselves with Trudeau by word and by example rather than an explicit comparison. To me, I'm going to be watching Carney. And I say that because unless he goes up there and kicks a puppy, he's going to win this leadership contest. That feels like it's done. So really, the thing to my mind is, can Carney use this moment with however many Canadians will be watching to try to connect, to reach past the leadership race, to try to start to set up a general election victory? And so far, the idea of Mark Carney has found a lot of appeal. We see that in public opinion polls that seem to be reversing. But tonight is an opportunity for the real Mark Carney, for the truth of Mark Carney, for the man Mark Carney, to cement that impression and to say, look, here's what you get when you vote me. Here's the challenge we face as a country. Here's the test that needs to be passed. Here's the Trump that needs to be confronted. And here's why I'm the right guy to do it. Can he seize that moment, throw a little energy behind it all, and treat it not so much as a debate, as an opportunity to connect with Canadians. I'll be watching to see how clear his argument is, how crisp his presentation to Canadians is, because I think this isn't a debate. This is a dress rehearsal for the general election.
Just really quickly, do you feel like he did that last night, or was he challenged in it, given the language and other factors?
He's not comfortable enough in French to navigate that kind of message and make that kind of presentation. Last night he was attempting to, to just pass a mandatory test and demonstrate basic credentials. Tonight he can swagger.
What do you think about that, Lisa?
So I think he's right, but I'm going to tell you that I think the tougher test is going to be the scrums after. So don't breathe a sigh of relief for when you're done on that stage with the three friends around you and Hannah in front of you, because I'll tell you, if you let your guard down as you walk into the pit after that, if you weren't pushed around hard enough during the debate, I expect that the Canadian media will push you around quite well afterwards.
Yeah, it's well attended, I would say. Also, like so far, many of the leaders have done, the candidates have done stuff in smaller markets where you're not getting a lot of, particularly people from the press gallery who are living and breathing this stuff. And that's, they've all made the trip, Tom, to Montreal. What are your thoughts on what Lisa and Scott lay out?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the after game show is going to be very important for all of them. With regard to the debate itself, I do think that there's enough low-hanging fruit for Carney to be able to distinguish himself solidly from Trudeau and at the same time maybe take a very glancing shot at Freeland. For example, he's already started doing it when he references the fact that we've had a 40% increase in the public service. We're giving away $17 billion a year to private companies to do the work the civil servants are supposed to be doing, but they're apparently not, because we have to give the work outside. And he can talk about the numbers in immigration. He doesn't want to start slagging his own team. But if he doesn't show that he understands why Canadians were frustrated enough to have pushed the Conservatives that high up in the polls, then he could fall back. So he's got to show that he's different from Trudeau, that he understands public administration, that there are clear examples of things that went wrong under the Trudeau era, and by implication, while a certain Chrystia Freeland was there around the table for every one of those decisions.
Okay, I'm going to swing over, if you guys don't mind waiting for a moment. We're about 5 minutes away from the start of this debate, to my colleague Michael Couture, who is live on site for us in Montreal. Mike, I know you've been in the so-called spinner room talking to various delegates from different campaigns. What are you hearing about what we should be expecting tonight?
Yeah, I think the overarching theme that we're hearing is that each one of them wants to distinguish themselves from the other candidates. Mark Carney's team telling me that essentially they are going to try and show how this candidate, their candidate, is the only one that can steer through this type of crisis that we could be seeing coming ahead, something with those tariffs and anything else that could come with the Trump presidency. Also hearing that they're going to try and really position themselves as the only outsider, the only person who hasn't been on government, the only person who hasn't been in this government especially. We know that Frank Baylis was an MP under the Trudeau government, and of course Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, and Karina Gould, who has been a minister in this government as well. That's where they're trying to go. Heard from Gould's camp that yes, they are going to try and draw out as much as possible and make that stark contrast between the other candidates and herself as well. She continues to say that she's the candidate of change. She's expected to try and really flesh that out a little more. And it sounds like from Freeland's campaign is that they want to really try and test Carney on his policy. what more meat can he put on the bone? Because what we've seen so far in a number of press conferences and his policies that he's been slowly rolling out, that, according to the Freeland campaign, not a lot of meat there. They want to see more, and they're going to try and draw that out of him today. Now, I think it's going to be interesting, Vassy, because if, in essence, they do draw that out of him and it makes him shine, then has that backfired on them? Is their plan to try and get him to talk about more about what he wants to do? Is it really their plan to try and put him in a corner and show that he hasn't put a lot out there and doesn't have a fully functional plan for going forward? You know, that may be what they're trying to do here. But if Carney is able to, as a lot of the panelists have said here, really sort of present himself as the only option available, as the one who has momentum, as the one who can take on Donald Trump, that's another key plank that his team is saying. That, look, you point to his experience as the Bank of Canada and Bank of England governor, you know, going through the 2008 financial crisis here in Canada and then Brexit with the Bank of England. Those are two things I'm expecting to hear a lot of in the next 2 hours. That type of experience, but at the same time, bringing a fresh face to this party. That's where he wants to go.
Okay, and Mike, you're going to be with us after the debate as well. That's our Mike LeCouture on scene there at the Liberal leadership debate. Scott, I'll just pick up where Mike left off and ask you, it's not going to be Pierre Poilievre they disagree on. It's not going to be Donald Trump. If there is something where we're going to see some differences of actual policy, where do you think it is?
It may be around Carney's own proposals. I mean, his distinction between operating budgets and capital budgets and exactly where is that line drawn. If you're Freeland, she may draw upon her time as finance minister to say, you know, it's a little more complicated than that. But honestly, I don't really expect that to happen. I don't think the Freeland's going to, she may try to be a little more energetic than she was last night. I don't think she's going to be more aggressive, more pointed, more hostile toward Carney than she was last night. At least I would be very surprised. It's not in her interest. It's not in the party's interest. Doesn't make a ton of sense. I'll add one thing. I think Mike's point about how do you draw upon your experience that uniquely qualifies you for this moment if you're Mark Carney, Brexit, the 2009 financial crisis, but still keep it about the future, right? People vote for the future. They don't vote for the past. So that is going to be an interesting balance to watch Carney strike. How does he draw upon his experience, but say, really, I'm about the next 10 minutes, not the last 10 years?
Lisa, you've been part of debates against, you know, fellow members of your party. In this instance, do you see room for policy differences tonight? And if so, where?
I do. Chrystia Freeland and Karina Gould on the use of resources in Canada. Karina Gould is very strong in terms of wanting to move past the use of fossil fuels. She said it many times, famously said it early on in one of her very first campaigns that oil should be left in the ground. And that's going to be something that stays with her. Maybe she tries to differentiate herself from Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, who are both pivoting towards natural gas and pipelines.
Tom, I'll give you the last word. I think we're just a few seconds out from the start, so if I have to cut you off, my apologies in advance.
No problem. I think that we're going to be paying attention to, on the Quebec side, if there are any differences between what he said last night and what he says tonight. We just talked about resources. He's shown a very strong willingness to use federal powers to push through pipelines. Yeah. He backed away from that in Quebec. Okay. Is that the type of thing that's
I got to cut you off again with apologies, but we'll all be reconvening after the debate. I'm going to throw right to it as the debate gets underway in Montreal. We're going to take you there live. Let's listen in.
Other questions just ahead.
And welcome to the English language Liberal leadership debate here in Montreal. I'm Hannah Thibodeau, the Executive Communications Officer with Global Public Affairs. Tonight, I am very thankful to be moderating this debate. Tonight, our candidates, I'm going to introduce you. Karina Gould, on the left, Frank Baylis, Chrystia Freeland, and Mark Carney will tackle 4 key themes. And those themes were informed by registered Liberals across this country. I'm just going to remind you what those were. If you didn't watch the French language debate last night, you missed a lot. But tonight, I'm glad you're with us. It's Canada's place in the world, growing a strong economy, supporting Canadians, and of course, climate change. I want to welcome all of you to the debate this evening. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Thank you.
Great to be with you, Hannah.
So I'm going to explain to viewers a little bit about the format and remind everyone here too, because we go off a little bit. So here's the format. In each theme, there is an opportunity for candidates to answer a 1-minute question. They'll each get that 1 minute and the same question. Also in the themes, there will be opportunities for 5-minute debates, and we're going to have closing statements. Some of tonight's questions did come from registered Liberals. None of the candidates or their teams know what the questions are. They're in my head. They will come out. Let's start. I want to get right into this and begin with opening statements. And this order was decided by a random draw. Mr. Baylis, your 90 seconds starts right now.
Again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Frank Baylis, and I'm a professional engineer. As a businessman, I built several companies in the healthcare sector. And along with that, I've created thousands of good-paying, high-technology jobs. I know how to build strong teams. I know how to find good people and work with them to achieve results. I've also been elected as a member of parliament from 2015 to 2019. So I have an understanding of how government works. Now, this combination of my private sector and my public sector experience puts me in a unique position to be able to build systems, work with the government, and make it work for all Canadians. Now, I recognize that we're living in challenging times, but having said that, I'm very optimistic about our future. Yes, I believe in Canadians and I believe in Canada, and with my plan, I'm certain we'll reach our full potential. I'm going to focus on 3 priorities. Number 1, I want to build a strong and resilient economy that we all benefit from. Number 2, I want to improve our healthcare system so that it becomes the best healthcare system in the world. And it's not going to cost more money, it's going to save money. And 3, I want to modernize the federal government such that it becomes much more efficacious, better at delivering services to our Canadian citizens. Together, we will build a proud and prosperous Canada for all Canadians.
Mr. Baylis, thank you kindly for that. Ms. Gould, your 90 seconds starts right now.
Meeting the moment. That's why we're here tonight. Growing up in a middle-class family in Burlington, Ontario, and now having 2 kids of my own, I get what Canadians are going through. Worrying about how to pay your mortgage, keep gas in the tank, or whether you'll be able to retire. I know it hasn't been easy as we face serious challenges to our economy and to our sovereignty. But these challenges also present us with incredible opportunities to unite our country, defend our economy, and protect our values from the threats we are facing from south of the border and our own little version of Trump here at home. I got into politics to do good things for Canadians. And with a decade of experience, I know how to get that done. I am so proud to be Canadian, especially right now, as Canadians across this country meet the moment. And tonight, each of us on this stage need to meet the moment. Tonight, I am going to raise the tough questions we need to confront as Liberals, have an honest conversation about where we stand on the big issues we face as Canadians, and present a clear plan for the future of this country. If we do not do that, we will lose the next election. Our opponents may wish that Canada is broken, but we know as Liberals, this is a great country. Now is the time for hope. I am the leader we need, and together we can build the Canada we want. And I'm asking you to join me.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. Ms. Freeland, you're up next.
A few weeks ago in Saskatoon, I met a 4-year-old girl named Ari. She asked me, "Can you stop Trump from invading Canada?" Ari is a smart girl, and she's asking the right question. I'm running to be leader of the Liberal Party and the next Prime Minister of Canada because Trump is posing the gravest challenge our country has faced since the Second World War. He's threatening us with economic warfare. That's not new. Last time, he threatened to rip up NAFTA, and he imposed tariffs on our steel and aluminum. I fought back, and I won. This time, Trump's threats are even worse. He wants to make us the 51st state. Trump is unleashed and empowered. As your Prime Minister, I will be too. I have the experience, the plan, and the guts to stand up to Trump. to tell him that Canada is not for sale. And if he hits us, we'll hit him back. We need a leader who understands the seriousness of the challenge and is ready to meet it. A leader who can say to Ari and to everyone across our great country, I will fight for you. I will fight for Canada. And together, we will win.
Ms. Freeland, thank you kindly. And we move now to Mark Carney.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mark Carney. I was born in the Northwest Territories, and I grew up in Edmonton. During my career, I've had the honor of serving our country, including as governor of the Bank of Canada during the financial crisis of 2008. Right now, as my colleagues have said, Canada faces one of the most serious crises in our history. To get through it, we will need to build a strong economy, and that requires big changes. Canadians have been telling me that they want change. They want positive change that builds this country. I can bring that change. I know how to manage crises. I know how to build strong economies. Yes, there are a lot of uncertainties, but during a crisis, it's important to distinguish what you can't control and what we can control. We can't change Donald Trump, but we can control our economic destiny. We are masters in our own home. I have a plan that puts more money back in your pockets, a plan that makes our companies more competitive, a plan that builds a strong economy that works for you. Canadians are ready to stand up for their country. I'm ready to stand with them and bring the right change for Canada. Thank you.
Mr. Carney, thank you. Thank you all. And we're going to get right into our first theme of this evening, Canada's place in the world. So for all these one-minute questions, you are all going to get that one-minute chance to answer the same question. And that's where we're starting this evening. And here's a warm-up for you tonight because it comes from Deborah in British Columbia. But I think Deborah really is showing what many Canadians are asking right now. She asks, how will you stand up for Canada against U.S. President Donald Trump? But I would like to add to what she has to say, why are you the best person positioned to do this? And the order was picked ahead of time. And Mr. Baylis, you're first on this. 1 minute on the clock.
Thank you. So I've negotiated hundreds and hundreds of contracts with Americans over my 40-year career. And from time to time, I run into the character of Mr. Trump. So it's not new to me. On this point, I published a letter one day before his inauguration when I said clearly he's not going to put 25% tariffs on everything, but he is going to attack certain industries. The first one I said he's going to attack is steel. It's exactly what he did. I tell you this to tell you that I know how to deal with him. And it's important to understand that Mr. Trump is a bully. And you do not give 1 inch to a bully. In that case, we cannot be learning this on the job. That's where I come in. I have the experience and the expertise to deal with Donald Trump. I can predict what he'll do, and then I can help build our defenses to stop him from doing those things, and also counterattack, which unfortunately is going to be necessary. This way, I will protect our country, I will protect our economy, I will protect our culture, and I will protect our sovereignty.
Bang on time for the 1 minute. Appreciate that, Mr. Baylis. Mr. Carney, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Hannah. I think in a situation like this, you need experience in terms of crisis management. You need negotiating skills, but you also need economic expertise because part of the way to deal with this situation is to do what we should have been doing and what we need to do as a country, which is to build a strong economy. Now, we're going to spend time on building a strong economy, so I'll go through my plan for that later. But let me start by being clear. We will never, ever be part of the United States in any way, shape, or form. We have to recognize that the Donald Trump of today is different than the Donald Trump of several years ago. Then his objective was to take more of our market. Now he wants to take our country. Let me finish by pointing out one other thing. Who's the worst person to stand up to Donald Trump? It's Pierre Poilievre. He worships the man. He uses his language. He's not the right person for our country at this crucial time.
Again, thank you for sticking to time on that. Ms. Gould, you're up now.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, Deborah, for the question. Look, men like Donald Trump have always underestimated leaders like me. But they underestimate me, and that's their mistake. And I think as Canadians, we know what that's like. We know how to stand up for who we are and to stand up to bullies. And that's something that I've been doing in the House of Commons for the last decade. I know how to stand up to people like Pierre Poilievre, who, when it comes to Donald Trump, would rather imitate him than stand up for Canada. I know how to stand up to people who want to take from us what is rightfully ours. We are a proud, sovereign country, and as Canadians, we have so much to offer, but also the Americans depend on us. And you can't bring a calculator to a knife fight. You have to fight very strongly and with the right tools, and that's exactly what I'm going to do as Prime Minister.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. We're going to move into our first 5-minute debate.
I think you forgot Chrystia.
Oh my gosh.
That's no
First
problem.
mistake by the moderator. My apologies. Ms. Freeland, thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Trump represents the biggest threat our country has seen since the Second World War. I have recognized that from the outset. I've built my campaign on a plan to answer that threat. I do think, though, it is a big mistake for Canadians to think that because we can't change Trump, we can't negotiate with him. Of course we can't change him, but we can outwit him. And the way to do that is by using our leverage, by recognizing that, yes, we depend on the US, but they depend on us too. We are their largest market by far. We sell them the things we need. A smart, tough negotiator who stands up to Trump can activate those Americans who need us, get them to lobby him. That's how we get a win-win outcome. That's how Canada wins.
And now we will move into that first 5-minute debate. Thank you for pointing that out. This is an open debate. Mr. Baylis, we'll start first with you. Others can join in on this debate, but please try not to talk over each other too much. We will control that. So here's the question. Knowing the why is vital in negotiations, or you're essentially just negotiating against yourself. So why is President Trump doing this to Canada?
Well, President Trump needs to show that he has a win on the border. And he's got himself elected by saying he's going to deal with illegal immigration. And right away, he puts out a tweet saying there's a problem with Canada and Mexico. The problem is, for him, there is no problem with Canada. We know it, and the Americans know it. So he's trying to make one so that he can later solve it. Now, I want to point something out. This is not a negotiations. This is a shakedown. We have an agreement. He negotiated the agreement. He signed the agreement. The problem we have is he's not respecting the agreement.
So you believe it's the border, is what I feel for you.
I'm saying that that's his red herring, that he's trying to say we're a problem with the border that he's going to solve.
Ms. Freeland and then Mr. Carney.
Trump is starting with us for a very simple reason. If you can show the world that you can beat up on Canada, your best friend, your reliable, trustworthy neighbor, then think about how the rest of the world feels. It is the demonstration effect. It is saying, if I can beat up on those guys, imagine what I can do to you. And that's why a smart Canadian strategy needs to start with looking for allies, working in the first instance with Mexico, Panama, Denmark, and the EU, who all face the same sovereignty challenge. I think we need to invite the Secretary General of NATO to that first summit that I will host right after becoming Prime Minister. Working with our allies, we form a common front and stop Trump from doing what he wants to do, which is pick us off one after the other.
Mr. Carney, you're up next.
I want to pick up on what Chrystia just said. Because I think underlying all this is what President Trump is looking for is to dominate the hemisphere. He wants to enlarge U.S. power into Canada, into Greenland, into the Panama Canal, as was just mentioned. So the stakes are very, very high. This is a serious crisis, not just an economic crisis. It's a crisis of sovereignty. So yes, we do need to build our allies. But interest of time, I'm going to add one other thing. And we'll come back to this later. We also need to build our economy. We need to build our economy right here. If we have one Canadian economy instead of 13, that more than outweighs the impact of what he's trying to do to us.
So,
Ms. Gould, go ahead.
Thank you. And where, as I see where my colleagues are going, and I appreciate, I think all of that is probably true, except what did we just see in Ukraine? He did a deal with Putin for critical minerals in Ukraine. Who else has critical minerals? Canada. And so we need to understand what the U.S. is trying to do here, but we also need to make sure that we are standing up for our sovereignty and for our economy. Last night there was a bunch of conversations with colleagues who said, well, I'm not even going to talk to Donald Trump. Well, guess what? We don't have that choice. We have to talk to him. That is something that we absolutely have to do on behalf of Canadians. We might not like it, but that is the role of the Prime Minister, to stand up and fight for Canada every single day. And that is exactly what I am going to do. Stand up for Canadians, stand up for our industries, and to say that we have leverage, we have things the U.S. wants, and we're not afraid to use them. And if that means that Americans are going to see increased prices or American industries are going to suffer, we will make sure that we put everything on the table as Canada, because our sovereignty, our economy, our jobs are non-negotiable.
Okay. Mr. Baylis, let's try to go 30 more seconds because we have more interactions here.
Let me tell you the first thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go fly down and meet President Sheinbaum of Mexico. It's a very strong, smart lady. And I'm going to make a deal with her and say, look, we need to stand up together to Mr. Trump. He said he's putting 25% tariffs on both of us. He can't do that. It'll destroy his economy. So we need to call his bluff. And then what we need to do is take off the table what was already given for nothing, which is the work that we were going to do on our border for $1.3 billion and the work that she was going to do on her border, and say, you know what? That's off the table now. We're back to square zero. That's how I will deal with President Trump.
Okay, Mr. Carney, you want to jump in, and then Ms. Freeland?
Let me make 2 points. One is you have to be able to do more than one thing at one time as Prime Minister. So that means building the economy. It means negotiating with allies, leveraging our critical minerals, leveraging our clean energy with those allies. That's critically important. And hitting hard with a real negotiation with President Trump, which includes dollar-for-dollar tariffs, includes using all the cards potentially that we have, and they are considerable, as the U.S.'s largest client.
But yesterday, let me get Ms. Freeland in first, and then just 1 second, Ms. Freeland, and then I'll come to you, Ms. Gould.
Recognize about President Trump is, with him, weakness is a provocation, and capitulation is not a negotiating strategy. The great thing is, right now, Canadians get it. There is this wave of patriotism in Canada, and Canadians are going to stand and fight for Canada. They need a leader who knows how to lead that fight and rally that wave of patriotism. I'm the leader who can do that.
Ms. Gould.
Thank you. Well, one thing that I would like to ask Mr. Carney, because yesterday he made some mentions of sectors that he would protect over others. And I think what is really important is to understand which sectors you're willing to protect, but which sectors you would negotiate away. And that is something that I think as Canadians, we need to understand, because as Prime Minister, I'm not going to negotiate any of those sectors away. I'm going to stand up for people in every single province and territory, every single sector, to make sure that we protect Canadian jobs and protect our industries.
Okay, as moderator, all due respect, I'm going to try to ask the questions, but I am going to give Mr. Carney the opportunity to respond to that as well, Ms.
So let me be clear about a few things. One, not everyone would have watched the debate last night. So in a negotiation, if there are things that should never enter into the negotiation, language, culture, our water, you make clear at the start of the negotiation that they are off the table. Second thing is that the other aspects, for example, our auto sector, I'll give an example, which is intimately and interconnected with the United States. We're going to negotiate around maintaining a good deal for our auto sector. But that is not the same as accepting a bad deal, Karina.
Well, actually, when it comes to the auto sector,
10 seconds
in the previous NAFTA negotiation, we got a better deal than we had before. We changed the rules of origin for car parts that it gave an advantage to high-wage Canadian workers. That's the kind of approach we need to take.
Ms. Gould, do you want 10 seconds before we move on?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, we are going to move on then. Thank you. That was a great, fulsome debate. We're going to move on to the next section, where it's a 1-minute response each for this question. So Donald Trump said again yesterday, I'm sure we all know, the 25% tariffs are coming on March the 4th. Only days later, one of you will become the Prime Minister of this country. What is your first move? And again, this was drawn ahead of time. And Mr. Baylis, your start.
So, first of all, I don't take him at his word. He said March 4th, but I would expect him to hit us beforehand, and I expect him to hit us again. What he's going to do is look at industries where he has overcapacity in the United States, because he'll be thinking that's going to hurt the American economy the least, I should say. So where I'm going to be looking at softwood lumber, and I'm going to be looking at dairy as the next two industries he's going to attack. And what we're going to be doing is supporting those industries completely. We're not going to let them take our jobs away. And we're going to be putting into place very intelligent counter tariffs. And then we're going to be waiting. And we're going to be waiting. Because he's not going to stop until he gets the lesson that he can't get away with this. Then what I am going to do is, as I said, I will go down and meet with President Sheinbaum of Mexico, come together with her and say, listen, let's hold the fort together. Let's call him on his 25% tariff bluff. Let's just call it. Tell him, do it. And let's take everything that he already took from us off the table.
Mr. Baylis, thank you. Ms. Freeland, you're up next. And again, days later, it's you that becomes Prime Minister. What is your first move?
My first move is dollar for dollar retaliation. And let me be very clear with President Trump. If I am Prime Minister, I will not flinch. We will retaliate. If you hit us, we will hit back. But our retaliation will be a lot smarter than their dumb tariffs. And it's the Wall Street Journal, usually a supporter of Trump, that described this Trump effort as dumb. Canada, by contrast, is going to be smart. We are going to have a targeted retaliation that exerts maximum pain in the U.S. and does minimum harm to us. We're going to hit Trump's best friends. I will impose a 100% tariff on Teslas. I'm going to hit Wisconsin dairy. I'm going to hit Florida orange juice. And you are going to see a stock market reaction. You're going to see people like the American Farm Bureau complaining about the Canadian potash they need that costs more. And that reaction, that pain, will cause Trump ultimately to back down, just like he did last time.
Ms. Gould, you're up next. Only days later, you become Prime Minister. What's your first move?
My very first move is to call a meeting with the Council of the Federation and bring the premiers together to make sure that we share our plan for Canada, because this is every single province and territory, every business leader in our country, every union leader, every single Canadian, and then to share the plan with the entire country, because Canadians deserve to know what we are doing. Absolutely, we retaliate against Donald Trump. We do a major Team Canada approach in the United States where we engage with American leaders, but also American citizens, because it is American citizens who are going to feel the impact of these tariffs. And we need to let them know that this is not Canada's decision. This is the decision of the United States. And I'm going to call on Canadians to stop going to Florida, to stop buying Florida orange juice, because that's a $50 billion economy in that state alone. Canadians matter to the United States.
Ms. Gould, thank you kindly. Mr. Carney, days later, you become Prime Minister. What's your first move?
Well, I'll pick up on a few things. First, entirely agree with what Karina just said. First item, I would call it a First Ministers meeting as opposed to a Council of Federations, but First Ministers meeting, sharing the plan, but also developing our broader response, our broader domestic response, including project. Secondly, entirely agree with Chrystia. Dollar for dollar tariffs, maximum impact on the United States, minimal impact here in Canada. Thirdly, put them on notice on the broader aspects of our commercial relationship. We are their largest supplier of energy. We are their largest supplier of electricity. We are their largest supplier of uranium. I could go on, but I will exhaust all my time. There is the first signs in the United States now of the economic impact of the Trump policies. We will amplify that, and that will begin to create the leverage. And then I will call President Trump.
And then you'll call President Trump.
Well, it's going to be a long day.
Okay, Mr. Carney, thank you. Ms. Gould, this is a 5-minute section, and I'm going to start with you on this. Others can jump in, again, if we can try not to talk over each other. Ms. Gould, what do you think Canada should be doing with our allies? And we did hear some discussion in the opening statements about this, given the shifting geopolitical sands around the globe.
Well, look, I mentioned that over the past week, Donald Trump has been negotiating away Ukraine's sovereignty. and their territorial integrity. We saw President Trump abandon the free world throughout this process. We absolutely need to shore up our allies with democracies around the world because our democracy is under threat. We need to protect the values that we care about. What does that look like? It means reaching the 2% NATO target, not because the U.S. asked us to, but because we need to as Canadians. It means making sure that we stand up for our values around the world, that we continue with our important international assistance. We saw Trump take away from USAID. Canada can't fill that void, but we can maintain our commitments. And it means making sure that we live our values on a daily basis on the international scene. The world needs Canada, and Canada will be there for the world.
Ms. Freeland?
It's a great question because what is different about this unleashed and empowered President Trump is he is clearly threatening our sovereignty, and we need to respond. For the first time, the U.S., rather than guaranteeing, for the first time since the Second World War, rather than guaranteeing the rules-based order, the U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. I've been foreign minister. I know how to do that. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat. And I would also, crucially, reach out to our Asian democratic partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They need to be part of the conversation too. We need to be ready for a world where the U.S. is not the leader of the free world anymore. Canada can be and must be a leader in building this new order. Our allies are looking to us. And if we do this, we'll make ourselves safer as well.
Mr. Baylis.
Yeah. Thank you. So we're in a lucky position in the sense that Donald Trump has targeted many other countries, European Union, we've talked about the other ones as well. So we can use this to our advantage. Now we can say to them, let's get together and target Donald Trump and target some of his industries. I'll give you an example. So Boeing Airlines, they have to sell planes all around the world, and they have competitors that can also compete with them and sell planes we can buy from Embraer, we can buy from Airbus and that. So we should get together with them and say, look, we're going to bankrupt Boeing. The Canadian government should also do this. Under the same guise that he's using to impose these tariffs on us, we should say, you know what? It's an emergency situation, and we got to relook at our defense spending, where we're buying planes from the United States. We're buying all kinds of defense industry products from the United States. And you know what? We're going to put them on hold for now, and if this continues for a couple more weeks, we're going to cancel them. We start this process, other people follow us, it will hit them exactly where it hurts.
Mr. Carney.
Well, it's interesting. I was asked a question a few weeks ago. I was in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and I was asked a question by some British journalists about whether the UK and Europe could avoid the impact of President Trump. And I said, good luck with that. Now they're beginning to see the impact. We've seen it through Ukraine and elsewhere. So there is an opportunity, in fact, a necessity, an imperative here for us to work with like-minded countries on the new security architecture. Yes, we have to step up for our contribution. How we protect our Arctic, which is under threat not just now from the Russians and the Chinese, but from potential U.S. incursions. Serious, serious issue. We have to work on our, I'll call it our data architecture, how we're going to handle artificial intelligence. Last point, because a lot of people want to come in.
Yep.
We need to leverage all of our assets from critical minerals to clean energy and well beyond to harden those partnerships in Europe and in Asia with like-minded.
Ms. Gould.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you to my colleagues, I think, for some very interesting ideas. Mark, you talked about reaching NATO targets, but of all of us on stage, you plan to reach those not until 2030, but the imperative to do that is now. You talked about the fact that the Arctic is under threat. We don't have time to wait for this. We have to actually make sure that we are investing here in Canada, reaching those targets, because our country, our sovereignty is under threat, and we are in a new world. And so the time to make those investments is now.
I do have a question about the targets coming up, so we will get to that. And just finally on this topic, Ms. Freeland.
I do believe we need to hit 2% by 2027, and we need to be focused on spending the money here in Canada with Canadian companies. But I want to be sharing a message from all of us directly with President Trump. What you are hearing from the Liberal Party of Canada is our sovereignty is not negotiable. Canada is not for sale. We are going to stand with all Canadians and not become the 51st state. And Pierre Poilievre wants to imitate you, but we are going to defeat him, and together we're going to fight for Canada.
So guess what? That question's coming up right now, Ms. Gould, so we can follow up. Mr. Carney, I'll give you the opportunity, because today the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, announced 2.5% of their GDP for defense spending by 2027. Everybody has spoken about boosting our own GDP in different years, so we'll clarify with you. Would you do the same? 2.5% by 2027.
Well, look, the first thing, we're starting from a different position than the UK is. But it also goes to the heart of what we're trying to accomplish. I think this goes to a fundamental point about how to manage government. The outcome here is securing Canada to protect Canadians. Now, I was born in the Arctic, born in the Northwest Territories. I know it well. I know the imperative. The imperative in the Arctic is to have at least 2 new bases in the Arctic, probably Tuktoyaktuk and Inuktitut. We need to build out on NORAD. We need to build out cyber capabilities. We need to build out our frontiers. The core point, I will spend defense dollars in Canada, not the 80% that this government has spent in the United States up until now. 80% of capital's defense dollars have gone to the United States. I will spend them in Canada, and I will spend them as rapidly as possible to secure for Canadians. But that is a management thing. It's not an arbitrary target.
Ms. Gould makes a good point, though. You had mentioned, I think, 2030.
I said by 2030.
Right.
And I said, when I said it, that we will do faster if we can deploy it faster in Canada. This is a management point. This is a core point about delivering security. And that is the issue, not just pushing money out the door.
1 minute for you, Ms. Freeland.
I think what it is about is will and a plan and commitment to defend our country. So I've put forward a plan to hit 2% by 2027. It is critical that we spend that money here in Canada on Canadian companies, and we need to be thinking about the next generation of warfare, as we're seeing in Ukraine. Drones, AI, these are really important. Our 2% should not be about sending checks to the United States. Critically, we need a plan to defend our own borders, very particularly the Arctic, and we need to be working with our Nordic and EU NATO partners. They have nuclear weapons. We need to say to them, we need a plan to protect and defend our shared Arctic without the US, and Canada will step up because it's our sovereignty that's at stake as well.
Mr. Baylis, you have 1 minute now.
Yeah, so about a year ago, I published a letter and said that we should meet our 2% GDP in defense spending and that we should do it by 2030. That was a 6-year time frame. And even at 6 years, to do it intelligently, it's actually quite compressed. So anybody can spend money and everybody can waste money. But to do it intelligently and such that it impacts and comes into Canada and we're buying Canadian products, Canadian services and that's not as easy. So I can't say that we would get to 2% in 3 or 4 years. I don't think that's doable in an intelligent way. There are some things we can do, which I did say, which is we should pay our armed forces much better. We're not doing that. We need to raise their pays, raise their benefits. Then I proposed something called CARD, which is the Canadian Agency for Advanced Research in Defense. And this is taking something that the Americans do, and they have their program called DARPA. So I'm copying that program where they invest in research and development in Canadian companies. They develop something, now we see it's working, then we can procure it. So I want to make the spending, but it won't happen that fast.
Okay, Ms. Gould, now over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. So, I mean, I think you hear from all of us that we want to increase our defense spending. It's just a matter of who's going to do it in the timely way that we need to do it. And I'm committed to doing it by 2027. And there are two ways that we can do this. First, by increasing the salaries of our Canadian Armed Forces. We do not pay our military personnel a sufficient wage in this country, and they are there for us when we need them most. And so we need to pay them more. That's something that I would do immediately as Prime Minister. Second, what can we do? You know, Mr. Carney talked about military procurement, but our military procurement isn't working. We have a lot of orders on the docket. We need a procurement czar to get those orders moving. And while I entirely agree with a Made in Canada solution, we need to ensure that our troops have the equipment, the tools, and the resources that they need to fight and protect us here at home and around the world.
Okay, this isn't a debate period, but I do see everybody wants to jump in. Ms. Freeland and then Mr. Carney.
I just want to push back against the idea that managerial or technocratic obstacles should get in the way of defending Canada. We really need to act with the fierce urgency of now. We need to recognize President Trump has said dozens of times he wants us to be the 51st state. I don't think any of us wants to be the leader who was asleep at the wheel and didn't get Canada defended, did not work with our democratic allies to protect our borders. They want to work with us. It's time for us to step up at home, to urgently reach out to them and build a new world order where democracy and Canadian sovereignty is protected.
Mr. Carney, you're up next.
I'm going to associate myself. I'm going to agree with that. The only amendment I'm going to make is, unfortunately, it won't be a world order. It will be a subset of the world order because the number of like-minded countries is much smaller with the U.S. exiting. But I want to make an important point because a huge element of securing Canada is going to be related to information warfare. It's going to be related to cyber. It's going to be related to artificial intelligence. And it's crucial that we're in Montreal. We're in one of the centers of artificial intelligence excellence. There are others in this country. It's crucial that we're building those capabilities on Canadian technologies, to Canadian values, to protect Canadians, because we can't rely on foreign suppliers for them. That is one of the new realities that are there. So the natural approach here is gone. And that's one of the main priorities I would have in terms of securing Canada.
Mr. Baylis, jump in there.
Yeah, so I'd like to give you an example of how we can do this intelligently and how we can do it the wrong way. If we try and push tens and tens of billions of dollars out the door within 3 years for government procurement of defense, it's going to be wasted. It's going to be splashed all over the place, and we're not going to get what we need. The program that I'm calling for, CARD, Canadian Agency for Advanced Research and Defense, what we would do, I'll give you an example with respect to drones. Right here in Quebec, we have a very strong aerospace industry. So we would give out 5 or 6 research contracts, and none of this, by the way, is subject to our trade agreements, and see who comes up with the best drone. And once we have that, then we can go and say, we're going to buy that from you. But to develop it and get it done like that, that's not going to happen. So if we try to do this too quickly, we're going to be wasting money, and we're going to be wasting an excellent opportunity to build Canadian industry.
Ms. Gould.
Thank you. I would push back gently on that to say that getting our troops the equipment and the supplies and the tools they need to defend Canada is not wasted money. It's actually imperative for them to defend and protect us in this time. But Mark brought up an interesting point about capabilities here in Canada. And as the Minister of Democratic Institutions, I put in place Canada's first ever and only plan to protect our country from cyber attacks in our democracy. And as part of that, I know that we have one of the premier cybersecurity institutions through the CSE here in Canada. But what we don't have is our own intelligence agency that can work to collect foreign intelligence. Now might be the time that we need to establish those capabilities. We heard earlier today that the Americans had thought about removing Canada from our Five Eyes partnership. We rely too much on the Americans for intelligence internationally, and we need to ensure that Canada has the capacity and the capability to protect ourselves, to work with democratic partners, and to ensure, more than anything, we are protecting Canadians, Canadian industry, and our economy at a time of intense cyber espionage. And this is something that is an important policy for today in 2025.
Ms. Freeland, jump in there.
You know, I really believe in Canada and Canadians, and there is this wave of passion in our country to defend our country. One of the reasons that I decided to run for the leadership is I had a conversation after Trump made his 51st state threat with a couple of very brilliant young technologists who worked with Jeff Hinton, the Nobel Prize-winning father of AI. And they said to me, we know what's happening in Ukraine, and we see how technologists are leading the fight. We are patriotic Canadians. We believe in our country. We need a government that gets that invests in us, because we are ready to stand on guard for Canada. And that is the approach we need to take. I think we need to have confidence that Canadians, empowered and led by a government that believes in them, will do this.
Mr. Carney.
Okay. This is a crucial conversation. And I'm really heartened by both the seriousness, the range of ideas, but I'm going to bring up one related aspect, which Karina just touched on, which is about foreign interference in our democratic institutions. And the responsibility of all politicians, particularly leaders of parties, and certainly a prime minister, is to be fully briefed on these issues. Pierre Poilievre hasn't ever bothered to get his security clearance. I've already, during this leadership campaign, filled out my forms. It wasn't that hard to do, I have to say, and put them in, and I fully expect to get it in the near future. This is the kind of irresponsibility at a time when our country is under threat that we cannot afford. We cannot afford a leader like Pierre Poilievre.
Mr. Baylis?
I'd like to just do two things. First of all, clarification on Ms. Gould. I put out my defense plan before yours, and in it, I made it very clear that I was going to raise salaries, but that's not going to spend tens of billions of dollars. Having said that, what we do need to do is increase enrollment, and that will come by getting better salaries and benefits. And also, there's another area where I'd like to see us step up, where we've really fallen far behind. We're down to 33 UN peacekeepers in the world. This is not acceptable for Canada, the country that brought peacekeeping to the world. So I'd like to really invest in recruiting, strengthening the number of people in our armed forces, and putting some out in peacekeeping roles.
I want to thank you all. That was a great first theme. We are going to move on now to the second theme of this evening. And this is going to be a question for all of you. It's a 1-minute question. And I'm going to start with Mr. Carney this time. So Canadians are living in tough economic times. As Prime Minister, what would your priority be to strengthen our economy?
Well, I think I'll start my answer by saying this will be one of my top priorities, jointly with these issues that we just touched on, largely with the U.S. and the threats to our security. A focus on building our economy on several layers. First and foremost, this is a time to build. We have an enormous opportunity to build our economy. That means building millions of homes. We're millions of homes short in this country. Everyone who's trying to buy a home is aware of that, particularly young. It's building infrastructure, both conventional energy infrastructure and clean energy infrastructure. It's building up on the conversation we just had, on intelligence infrastructure. It is diversifying our trade partners with new trading routes, and it's creating one Canadian economy instead of 13. That's what's necessary to move this country forward from where we are today, which has become quite a weak position economically.
We will dig into some of those topics a bit more. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thanks. Thanks, Hannah. I think your question was actually about the cost of living for Canadians. It wasn't about, the macroeconomic picture, which we know is doing okay for Canada. But when Canadians, people, don't feel like that, it's not working for them. I'm glad to hear, my colleague talk about housing. It's one of the first times I've heard him talk about it during this campaign. I put out a very bold, ambitious plan on housing that would eliminate homelessness, that would build millions of homes, and that would help first-time homebuyers get into the market. I've proposed a 1% GST tax cut from 5 to 4% to help Canadians with the immediate cost of everything. And I've put forward a plan to modernize our social safety net and put us on a path towards a basic income. Canadians are struggling. We need to help them make ends meet. That's what leadership looks like, and that's what the economy means to me. It's about people.
Ms. Gould, thank you. Mr. Baylis, you're up for a minute.
Yes, I put together a plan, an economic plan. I call it my prosperity plan. And I'm going to bring fiscal discipline to Ottawa. And yes, we're going to have to stop running deficits. It has a direct impact on the value of our dollar, and that has a direct impact on affordability. So I will not be cutting the GST. I'm going to modernize our healthcare system to get it to do a lot better with less. That's our biggest spend for provinces, our biggest transfer from the federal government. I'm going to increase productivity. This is something I know from my work in business, but it's something as well that I'm going to bring to government. And also, I'm going to do a lot of procurement as much as possible within our trade rules from Canadian companies. Together, this is going to put us on the right path. Now, people say, what date? What date, Frank, are you going to end deficits? I can't give you a date, but what I can say is this. We're going to stop going down this pathway, and we're going to start going down this pathway of budgetary balanced budgets. And this is going to raise our dollar, and that'll be better for everyone in the long run.
Okay, and 1 minute now to Ms. Freeland.
All economic plans today have to start with an effective response to President Trump. He is the biggest economic menace our country and Canadians are facing. I have a plan to make us united, strong, and smart, and to win. I think we also all recognize that President Trump is also handing us a golden opportunity. Canadians right now really get how wonderful Canada is, and they understand we're under threat. And so today we have a chance, a once-in-a-generation chance, to make Canada stronger, richer, more prosperous, more resilient. I'm going to seize that opportunity. I'm going to cut interprovincial trade barriers. I'm going to cut red tape and get things built. I'm going to use government procurement not to send checks to the US, but to invest in Canadian jobs and Canadian companies. That's how we make Canada stronger, more resilient. That's how we stand up to President Trump.
We are going to move into the 5-minute section, so I'm just going to lead off with a question, but I'm sure you may have things you want to jump in on each candidate. Mr. Carney, you will start this 5-minute debate. Others can jump in. Last year in Canada, there were over 2 million visits to food banks. That's the highest in our history. For people who are at home, how would you make it more affordable for them?
Okay. I would like to come back to some of the points raised, but this is such an important issue. I'll go straight to affordability. You know, what's happened in this economy over the last 5 years is that people's wages have not kept up with the rise in prices. So we've had the average family of 4, their food basket has gone up by more than 25%. Their wages haven't kept pace with that. So, and we see the growth in food banks, but we see everyday middle-class families struggling as a consequence of it. So a huge range of things need to be done to improve affordability. And let me list some of those because they're crucial. The first thing is my government will make a middle-class tax cut. Secondly, my government will remove, as Ms. Freeland will, remove the GST for first-time home buyers. This is a crucial point, getting on the home ladder. We need to, if we have one Canadian economy, we can reduce prices by 15%. If we have greater competition in our economy, which my government will deliver, in groceries, in broadband, in transportation, that will bring prices down. That will help people move ahead. So we have to tackle the affordability issue across the board. Last point, absolutely have to keep in place the progress that the government has made on crucial things such as childcare, on dental care, and farmer care, because that helps those who are most vulnerable.
We'll talk a little bit about healthcare soon, too. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you, Hannah. You know, when my colleagues talk about households, I talk about families. When they talk about, you know, the macro picture, I talk about what it means for individuals. And I'm so proud that I was able to deliver affordable childcare for families across this country. And I would expand that to include before and after school care as well. But when we're talking about people who are going to food banks, we're talking about the most vulnerable in our society. A middle-class tax cut or removing the GST on new homes isn't going to help those folks. But you know what will? Modernizing our social safety net, making sure that seniors who live on a fixed income, persons with disabilities, folks who have lost their job, who need support to retrain and rebound are better off. And that's why I'm talking about opening a path towards a basic income. Poverty costs money. That's why we need to work to eliminate homelessness. It's why I would work with provinces and territories to have specific accords to ensure that folks who get into housing can stay stable and that they can enter the workforce and join and be prosperous. We need to tackle poverty in this country. It is urgent for us to do, and it is something that I am promising that I will work on with Canadians to ensure that every person in this country has a real, viable opportunity for success.
Ms. Freeland, you're up next.
I am so glad to have childcare mentioned. As finance minister, one of the things I was so grateful to be able to do was to introduce in my first budget a national system of early learning and childcare. And it was wonderful to work first with Ahmed Hussein, get that first crucial deal with BC and a bunch more. And then Ahmed handed the baton to Karina, and we worked together. This is generational. It's transformational for Canada. My affordability plan includes 100,000 more childcare places. It includes a middle-class tax cut. It includes a cut on credit card fees. It includes a cut on taxes for first-time home buyers. And the critical thing for us to all remember is the real threat to Canadian families, the real threat to people working really hard and struggling to get by is not anyone on this stage. It is Pierre Poilievre. He will cut. He will bring in a cruel austerity that will hurt all the people in Canada who need the help the most. And that's why I'm proud to be a Liberal, and that's why I'm running to be the next leader of our party.
Mr. Baylis, I'm trying to pick up some time here. 30 seconds to you, and then I'm going to come over to you, Mr.
So you mentioned food banks. I've actually been on the board of directors of a food bank for 11 years. And you'll note that was over the time that I was a member of parliament. So normally I stepped off all boards because you don't want to politicize them. But the food bank said, Frank, we don't care. We need your help. Please stay on the board. So I understand this intimately. Now, what tends to happen with politicians, they did it this time. They brought the grocery store owners in and they yelled at them and screamed at them. But the reality is this. If you want to buy an orange, that grocery store has to go buy it in the United States in US dollars, bring it to Canada, convert it to Canadian dollars. Every time our dollar goes down, that price of that orange goes up. Now, if we want to get that down, working, we need to bring our dollar up and bring oranges, bananas, everything else down. That's the solution.
Mr. Carney?
I want to be clear, and Canadians feel this. I want to be clear about the, quote, strength of our economy. Our economy over the last 5 years has been driven by a big increase in the labor force, which was largely because of a surge in immigration that is now trying to be controlled, and by government spending that grew over 9% year after year after year, twice the rate of growth of our economy. Okay, so our economy was weak before we got to the point of these threats from President Trump. That's why we need big changes. That's the reason I'm here. That's why we need big changes to how we're managing this economy. I want to make one last point, which goes to workers. My plan, it's a time to build across this economy. We can go into more detail. It is going to be a great time going forward to be a worker in Canada. It is going to be a great time to be in the trades in Canada because we are going to build this country across this country for Canadians and with Canadians.
Ms. Gould, I'm going to give you 30 seconds. We are out of time, but I want to...
Look, I'm not going to talk down Canada. I am only ever going to be a champion for this country. And when it comes to the question that was asked about poverty, we actually have to talk about people in poverty and what their lived experience is. When I was the Minister of Families, I worked on a national school food program that is now going to be supporting thousands of kids across this country and delivered childcare. But let's be clear, poverty costs us money, and investing to tackle and end poverty, like things like the Canada Child Benefit or increasing senior supports, is going to benefit all of us.
Okay, and 30 seconds to you, Ms. Freeland, and then we'll move on.
I just want to say really quickly that we need to be really careful not to repeat conservative talking points. Canada most definitely is not broken. We are a strong, resilient country. Canadians live 4 years longer than Americans, and median wealth in Canada is higher than in the US. Trump is giving us an opportunity to make a strong economy even stronger and more resilient. And I think as Liberals, we have to remember the great legacy of Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin. We are the party that believes in social policy and economic policy. We know how to deliver jobs and growth, and we know how to support people. We believe in both, and that is the kind of party and that is the kind of government I will lead as Prime Minister.
We're going to have one more 1 minute issue, and we can talk about all of the other stuff in that as well. So I'm going to start, this is supposed to be with Ms. Freeland as well on this one because it was previously drawn. As Prime Minister, and we're coming back to what we were talking about when it comes to managing the nation's books, how would you manage the nation's books at this critical time? And of course, you were the former finance minister.
Yeah, well, I would start by pushing back very forcefully against conservatives who talk Canada down. The reality is Canada has a strong fiscal position. We have a AAA credit rating, and we have the lowest debt and the lowest deficit in the G7. That was important for me to maintain a fiscally responsible position because I know that we have needed to keep our fiscal firepower dry because I saw that Trump was coming. Today, we need to seize the opportunity that Trump presents us to harness this wave of Canadian patriotism and to build a Canadian economy which is even stronger with more jobs, more investment, more prosperity. And critically, we need to remember that standing up to Trump is the foundation of all economic policies, and there could be some pain involved. The government has to be there to support workers, to support businesses. As Prime Minister, you have my commitment that I'll do that.
Mr. Baylis, your 1 minute starts now.
So as I mentioned, I'm going to bring fiscal discipline to Ottawa. Now, when I say that, a lot of people think, okay, is he going to cut services or is he going to raise taxes? It's neither. There's a third option, which is to increase productivity. So if we increase productivity, we increase richness, we increase our tax base and everything. Now, as a business owner, I've done that. When I brought a company from 2 people to 1,000, I know how to invest intelligently to increase productivity. Added to that, as I mentioned, I've also been elected. So I'm the one person here that understands both sides of the coin. And I'm going to use that skill set to then say, okay, how do we put in place government programs that are going to help the economy work, government programs that are going to be à la bénéfice, to the benefit of businesses, and take away ones that are hurting, such as, for example, I wrote well over a year ago that the increase in capital gains was a very bad idea because it goes against what we want. It discourages investments when we want to encourage them.
And Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, I'm all for increasing productivity. And in fact, last week, I announced a plan to create 1 million new entrepreneurs in this country. I'm the daughter of a small business owner. I grew up working in the family business, and I think we need to unleash that economic potential. But if someone tells you that they're going to balance the books in a very short period of time, increasing our productivity in that period of time is not going to be sufficient. And at a time when we are facing potentially one of the greatest economic shocks our country has experienced, we need to ensure that the government can be there for Canadians, like the federal government was during the pandemic with the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the business loan, as well as the wage subsidy, because we will win against Donald Trump. But we need to ensure that Canadians have the income support they need and the jobs to get to when we eventually win. Thank you.
Mr. Carney, the last in the 1 minute.
Okay, well, it was my privilege to work with Paul Martin when he balanced the books and kept the books balanced. And one of the lessons of that is the need for government to continue to focus on how effectively it is spending precious taxpayers' dollars. In other words, a focus on the outcomes of programs as opposed to the dollars going in. And one thing you can see is that the scale of increase in spending and the scale of increase in the public service hasn't been matched by greater productivity in certain areas. So the focus does have to go to that in order to create the room and maintain the room for those social programs, because that is what the Liberal Party is about. One of the core things, which is to manage responsibly our fiscal position so that we can support the vulnerable in society, so we can move forward as a society. So we need to spend less and invest more as a country.
We're going to move into a 6-minute debate on this. Yes, because this is something we want to continue to discuss. Ms. Freeland, I'll go to you first on this one. Productivity seems to be sort of a sleeper issue. When you mention it to Canadians, they go, How will you fix productivity in this country?
Well, I think that President Trump is giving us this golden opportunity to fix some of the long-standing, well-known obstacles to Canada being more productive. Interprovincial trade is the standout example, and we now have the will to do it. Recognizing foreign credentials of people who are already here, you know, that famous person we all know who is driving a taxi but is a nurse or a doctor, that's another example. Another one is just cutting red tape to get big projects built. But we're coming to the end of the economic section, and I do want to talk about a part of the economy where there have been huge leaps in productivity, which is central to Canada's resilience and economic strength, particularly as we face up to Donald Trump, and that is rural Canada and our farmers. I am the daughter of a farmer. I grew up on a farm. There are no people in Canada or the world who work harder than farmers. And I do think it's really important for us to have government policies that support our farmers. They give us food security. They are an important source of strength when it comes to this standoff with the U.S. And we need to be very clear with Canada's dairy farmers that we will stand for supply management. I mean, isn't it a good thing that we produce our own milk, our own eggs, our own butter, our own cheese, that we're not dependent on U.S. factory farms for that? So we need to remember and stand with our farmers.
Ms. Gould, you're next, please.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, Chrystia, I'm really glad you mentioned the rural economy and agriculture. One of the first things I would do as Prime Minister in my speech from the throne is to ensure that we protect supply management. It was a piece of legislation that unfortunately died when we prorogued Parliament, but I think it is imperative that we protect our supply managed sectors. But I think one of the frustrations that rural Canada has had with us as a government is that we haven't spoken enough about sectors in rural Canada, whether that is mining, whether that is, energy, whether that is agriculture, whether that is forestry. And, for us, we have to really ensure that when we talk about productivity, we're not just talking about new sectors, we're talking about existing sectors. And this is where AI can be used as a tool to enhance productivity in those sectors. And that's something that I'm really excited about. But one thing that I do want to mention, and Mark, I'm glad you talked about Paul Martin, because I know you were a really excellent Deputy Minister of Finance who did really good work, is that we also need to remember that the economy is about people. It's not just numbers or points on a graph. It's about how do we make the economy work for people. And Hannah, your question about productivity, what does that mean to the average Canadian when they're saying, I can't afford my groceries and I'm having a hard time paying my rent? We need to talk about the things that matter to Canadians, not because we're talking as politicians, but because we're talking as people who understand and experience what they're going through. Okay. And that's something that I bring to the table.
Okay, I'm going to have to stick to time on this topic. Mr. Baylis, you wanted to jump in on that, and then Mr. Carney after that.
So when we talk about productivity, one of the first places I'm going to look at is the federal government itself. That's when I talked about modernizing the federal government, one of my 3 priorities. I'll give you an example here. Revenue Canada is the biggest pain point for both individuals and businesses in trying to pay their taxes. This is ridiculous. This is such a waste of time, and that wasted time directly impacts their productivity. So I'm going to fix Revenue Canada. I'm going to get it working the way it should work, because the people that are calling and trying to work with Revenue Canada are good people. They're trying to pay their taxes. Other things I'm going to do, I'm going to build 2 pipelines, 2 gas pipelines to get our great Alberta natural gas to the East Coast and the West Coast. That's going to have a huge impact on our economy. It's going to diversify us away from reliance just on the Americans. And yes, it's going to have a very positive impact on the world's environmental situation, because it'll allow our Asian and our European allies to come off of coal and oil and start using a much cleaner fuel, liquid natural gas from Alberta.
Mark Carney.
Okay, one of the reasons why families have a hard time to afford their groceries is because we haven't had productivity. That's the issue. It's that their wages aren't keeping pace with prices. That's because they're not being given the right tools to work with. We're not working as smart as we should. So that's the challenge that we're talking about. And that's the result, and that's the connection. As Prime Minister, you need to make the connection between policies that make that difference that go to families. So both are connected. A couple quick points. Number one Canadian economy will drive huge productivity. Secondly, productivity in government, as Frank just says, I won't go on about it, but it's absolutely essential. We have not had the productivity we need in government. Thirdly, the 2 big drivers of productivity going forward will be the energy transition and AI.
Okay, I'm going to give you each 15 seconds. Ms. Freeland, with you first.
Making Canada more productive, which just really means making us all more prosperous, means we have to invest in infrastructure. Yep. We have to invest in physical infrastructure. That's why I'm so supportive of high-speed rail. We also have to invest in social infrastructure. That is infrastructure too. And early learning and childcare is such a great example, because this is a policy which makes life more affordable for families. It makes kids smarter because it's so high quality, and it adds to the labor force without requiring any new homes. So physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and we have the national will to really do this, because we know we need to be more resilient, because we're at this critical moment for our country, facing the need to stand up to Trump and defend our sovereignty and our economy.
That was not 15 seconds, but we'll try again. Karina Gould, 15 seconds for you, and then I am going to give Mr. Baylis 15 as well.
The job of Prime Minister is to connect with Canadians, and it's to ensure that you are placing the priorities of Canadians at the center of everything that you do. That's why tackling things like homelessness and housing affordability actually make people's lives more affordable. That's the job of being a politician. It's putting the human face on policy.
Mr. Baylis, 15 seconds.
So with respect to productivity, I'm one of those people that says, what's best practices? Now, one of the leaders in productivity in the world is Ireland, and they have a very clear axiom of belief: capital gains should be lower, because it encourages investments. Whether you're on the right or the left of the spectrum, they all know that. They keep their capital gains tax very low, and that encourages the investments that they need for productivity.
Literally 5 seconds, Mr. Carney.
It's time to build. We should support builders, and those are people who take risk for our country.
Okay, we are going to move on to our third theme this evening. I want to thank you for that last one. It was a really good debate. And we're going to start with you, Ms. Gould, on this one. This is a 1 minute, so each of you are going to get 1 minute to respond to this. In 2015, Justin Trudeau swept to power in large part because young Canadians, they liked him, they voted for him. But fast forward to today, that age group is really moving towards the right. What will you do as Prime Minister to win back the support of that age group?
Thanks, Hannah. Well, maybe the debate so far is indicative of why young people are not supporting the Liberals right now, because we're not talking about the issues that matter to them. We talked a little bit about housing, but that's one of the biggest challenges that young people are facing right now. My plan to really supercharge our housing investments, but also to ensure that young people can actually enter the housing market will make a difference in that regard. We're not talking about the cost of living, on how challenging it is to be a young person these days, and the dream of owning a home or having that prosperity that's just not there. And if I can be honest, one of the things that we did was we lost trust of younger people because we weren't focused on the issues that mattered to them. And so my pledge as Prime Minister is to ensure that I am building a future for you as young people and for future generations.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Frank Baylis, you're up next.
So for young people, there's a few things that are critically important. First of all, let's talk about education. We've done something very silly. By the way, my 1 minute is not on. Should it be on?
I'll keep track.
Okay, sorry about that. So,
that was very honest.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
And you'll get those extra seconds.
No problem. So what I was going to say is that, first of all, I want to see real investments in our universities. We've been squeezing our universities, and quite frankly, that's the dumbest thing we should be doing, because that's the foundation of an advanced economy. So I want young people to know that I will be completely supporting your education. Second thing is, they are the ones that are going to find it hardest to buy a home. So we need to help them buy a home. And there's two things we can do. Well, there's many things, but two things that I'm proposing is to increase the amount for the first home savings account. It hasn't kept up with inflation and that. So we need to increase the amount of money that people can put aside so they can buy a home. And the second thing we need to do is really keep the investments going, which have been lacking for so long, in social housing. The government's got out of social housing, and there's a knock-on effect that affects everybody when that happens. So we need to get back into social housing. We need to help young people buy their homes. And what we need to do, when I get the government in order, what will happen is you'll have more money in your pocket. It'll take a little bit of time, but you will be able to buy a home.
Ms. Freeland, your 1 minute is now.
Well, I was there in 2015. I had been a backbench MP for 2 years, and I remember how electric that campaign was. And the reason we won, at the heart of it, was we recognized the pain that middle-class Canadians, including young Canadians, were feeling. And we recognized and identified that Stephen Harper led a lackluster recovery from the 2008 financial crisis. We pointed that out, and we said we are going to invest for jobs and growth. Today, we need to do the same thing, and we need to focus on affordability for young people. I have a plan to do that. Cut taxes for first-time home buyers. Cut taxes for the middle class. 100,000 new childcare places. Cap credit card fees. We need to be there for young Canadians so that they can know if they work hard, study hard in the free trade schools I will offer them, they can have a great Canadian middle-class life.
Mr. Carney, you're next.
Okay. Are we going to talk about housing?
We're getting there.
Okay, good. Because housing's central to this, but I want to add to the opportunity set for younger Canadians, which has shrunk in recent years. Let's expand it. Let's expand it in all aspects of what we're doing. First and foremost, it's a time to build, as Ms. Freeland just said, focus on infrastructure, building this economy out. There is a huge range of opportunities that comes. As I say, for the next 25 years, being in the trades, fantastic if we follow through with the promise there. That's the first. The second is, as Mr. Baylis said, let's look at our universities. Their funding is being squeezed and has been squeezed, and it's been made up by having foreign students. That's come to an end. We need to be there for our universities, or we're going to miss the opportunity. Thirdly, we need broad-based skills training. The federal government has a role there. We need to leverage AI and others to deliver it.
Okay, we are going into a 5-minute debate now. And Ms. Gould, I'm going to start with you again on this one. This is from a Liberal in Ontario, Chrystia. She's asked the question in this survey, how do you plan to make owning a home, and there comes the question about home ownership, feel like a possibility to those stuck in renter's land?
Thank you, Karina, for that question. So there are two parts of my comprehensive plan on housing. One, create an industrial housing strategy so that we can build millions of new homes. We can use modular homes. We can invest in co-op housing, but also to increase the first-time home buyers incentive. Right now, it's about 5 to 10%. I want to increase that to 50% so that first-time home buyers can actually get into the market, build equity, and buy back that equity over time. But I want to pick up quickly on the last question, because I was actually a young person in 2015. And I was excited about what the Liberal Party of Canada was offering, and I was excited about Justin Trudeau's leadership. And you know why? Because it was a bold, ambitious plan for our country. It was progressive. We were going to fight. We fought climate change. We talked about new ideas to move this country forward. And the way that we're going to bring young people back to the party is not by being conservative light and not by being unambitious for Canada. It's going to be by having bold ideas for this country where Canadians feel inspired and hopeful about the future that we're going to have. That's what young people are looking for. They're looking for a hopeful future where those opportunities exist. And, you know, I'm not quite still a young person, although I'm younger. You know, it's that energy, that drive, that optimism for the future that is going to build the best country in the world.
Ms. Freeland, you're up next, please.
So first of all, I want to say, Carissa, thank you very much for being involved and for asking that question. I hear that question from so many younger people who are just frustrated that they're worried that they've lost out on getting into the housing market, and maybe the kind of life that their parents had is not going to be available to them. It is absolutely essential for us as a country that we say, we're not going to let that happen. And if young Canadians work hard, have a good job, studied hard, and they want to own a home, we have to make that dream of home ownership achievable. I have a plan to do it. It starts with cutting taxes for first-time home buyers to give them a leg up in the housing market. I'm so glad to hear so many people mentioning the first home savings account. I introduced that as finance minister. I think it is a great way for young people to save for that first home, and I would increase the amount of money that people can put in that first home savings account. Free trade school is going to help people get that first home too, because it will mean there are more skilled tradespeople to build those first homes people need. And then finally, I just want to say, some people are going to want to buy their own home. Some people want to live in affordable housing or maybe a co-op. I lived in a co-op. One of my aunts still lives in the co-op she and my mom helped build. There is, though, someone in Canada who does not believe in affordable housing, who does not believe in co-ops. Pierre Poilievre has actually called them Soviet-style housing. And so we all need to be very, very clear. We must defeat him because some Canadians need affordable housing too.
Mr. Baylis, you're up next.
So I feel for these young people. When I look at the house prices, I shake my head and think, my gosh, when I was buying a house, I thought it was hard. And it was, my first home was $195,000. It's almost shameful to say that now. But back then, buying a home was about 4 times your salary, your annual salary. It's gone up to now 10 times your salary. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we're not going to bring house prices down again. So we need to get your salaries up, and we need to get more money in your pocket, and we need to bring the cost of living back in line. So what I'm proposing to do is, there's a number of technical issues which I've listed on my website, but in a general sense, I would say to young people, start saving. If I become Prime Minister, I'll get to work on the economy. I'll create the good jobs that you need, just like I've done in my own businesses. You'll have more money in your pockets, and we'll get the cost of living under control. And in a few years, with the home saving plans and that, you will be able to buy a house. So please do not lose hope on that.
Okay, Mr. Carney, I'm going to end this segment on you, please.
Okay, so we need to double the rate of home building in this country. That 10 times salary point, we need to double the rate in order to even have the places for those people. We obviously need to get those incomes up at the same time. So there's 2 questions here. How do we get the rate of home building going from $250,000 a year to $500,000? We're going to need changes to how we build homes, much more technology, much more modular homes. We're going to need a big surge, as was just mentioned, in tradespeople who can build those homes. We're going to need to cut the fees in municipalities for developers. The federal government has a role to play there. We have a housing accelerator fund that's working. I would supercharge that as part of this. And then on the other side of the equation, we need to make it more affordable, particularly for young people, to buy those homes. Now, removing GST on first-time home purchases, that's 5% off the home, which is a substantial proportion of the down payment. There's other financing mechanisms that come with that. But in the end, and let me finish on this will come back to our ability to build a strong economy. It's not just building the homes, it's building the strong economy so people can catch up.
We're going to move on to our next segment. It's not the segment, another theme, but this is an important topic. Canadians are worried they can't access a doctor or a nurse. What would you do as Prime Minister, working with the provinces, of course, because it is provincial jurisdiction, and territories to help solve this issue? And Mr. Carney, you are up first on this one.
Well, this is a crucial issue. Across the country, virtually without exception, in fact, I would say without exception, access to a doctor, in many cases, access to a healthcare professional is not possible. Healthcare is a right in Canada. We are not living up to our commitments. And this is not as simple as saying, I'm not saying you implied this, that it's a provincial jurisdiction. So first and foremost, we have to meet our responsibilities as the federal government in terms of the healthcare transfers, but we have to do a lot more. We have to make sure, and we should be part of this, that healthcare professionals can move across this country as readily. So a nurse in Quebec can go to Alberta, can go to Northwest Territories and practice immediately. We have to make it easier for foreign health professionals to work more rapidly. We have to increase productivity in the health sector. Mr. Baylis has ideas on that, including on portable data, portable health records, which are crucial, but a broader use of AI, and us, last point, us as the federal government, accelerating those changes to deliver what Canadians deserve as Canadians, and we're nowhere close yet.
Ms. Gould, you have 1 minute on the clock now.
Thank you. My goodness. I mean, this is something that every Canadian has experienced. Yeah. The anxiety of not being able to have a family doctor, or worried, and what we're seeing across the country is emergency rooms that are closed or that are understaffed, and hallway medicine. This is absolutely a provincial jurisdiction, but the federal government has an important role to play in two regards. When it comes to health transfers, we need greater accountability from provinces, not to the federal government, but to their own citizens on the outcomes and the outcomes that they expect to deliver for their citizens. And then when the federal government can do is convene provinces and territories and colleges to ensure that our healthcare workers can travel across the country, but we also expeditiously can recognize foreign-trained doctors and healthcare professionals so that every Canadian has access to a family doctor and the medical specialist that they need when they need it.
Mr. Baylis, your 1 minute is on the clock.
So I've spent 40 years of my career in the healthcare industry, and I can give you examples where I've walked through emergency rooms, down the hallways, and I've seen people in gurneys up and down there, and it's broken my heart. So I'm absolutely committed to fixing the healthcare system. What we need is a change in paradigm. Our system was designed in the 1960s when the population generally was younger, and it was designed for acute care. Now we have a chronic care problem. So we need to redesign our system to treat chronic care. Presently, there's only 2 doorways into the system. If you're lucky, you have a family doctor, and if you're not, what do they tell you to do? Go to the emergency room. So what I want to do is open 3 more doors into the system. I want to go to pharmacists, first of all, and expand their scope of practice. They can do so much. I want them to do a lot more, which they're trained to do. Number 2, I want to train 6,000 nurses to become what we call nurse practitioners. That would allow them to do almost as much as a doctor and have them staffed across the country. And finally, I want to invest in home care.
And Ms. Freeland, 1 minute for you as well.
Well, thank you, Hannah. And I want to start by thanking the great, hardworking people in the Canadian healthcare system. A few days ago, I spoke to a nurse practitioner. Her name was Kathy in Riding Mountain. Hi, Kathy. I hope you're listening. She's a Liberal. And she talked to me about how much she loves her job and cares for her patients, but how much of a strain the strain on the healthcare system imposes on her, too. So thank you very much. We do have to make it better. We have to make it better by training more doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners here in Canada, by recognizing foreign credentials and by allowing credentials to be portable across the country, by inviting the great doctors and nurses, Canadian ones, in the US who want to come home, encouraging them to come home, making it possible. And finally, we need to be clear with Canadians who care about their healthcare system. You cannot trust Pierre Poilievre with our universal single-payer healthcare system. All he believes in is cuts, cuts, cuts. And that is one of the things that motivates me as a Liberal to defeat the Conservatives in the next election.
We are going to go into an open debate section here on this. And Mr. Baylis, yes, I will start with you on this one.
Okay.
I want to ask a follow-up question on it. Is it simply a question of money when it comes to healthcare and transfer payments, increasing that money, because I know provinces would love to have more money for healthcare, or does the structure of the healthcare system need to change?
So a few years ago, the federal government announced something like $40 billion more in healthcare spending, and nobody went, great, finally it's solved. We all shook our heads and said, great, we're just shoveling more money into the fire, because we do need to change the paradigm. Now, the wonderful thing I can tell you is that I have seen the technologies that can do that develop right here in Canada. I'm working with one company I'm supporting, and that they've developed is amazing in terms of electronic medical records, using artificial intelligence to wrap around and read all your records anywhere they are and produce reports accordingly. I've seen other AI developments in Canada again, where they allow doctors to spend a lot less time note-taking, in fact, no time note-taking, and everything collaged put together for them, and doctors can be doctors. So we have the technology here. We have the ability to go forward here. This is what I'm going to bring to the healthcare system. And when I'm done, we are going to have the best healthcare system in the world. Believe it.
Ms. Gould, you're next on this one.
Thank you, Hannah. Look, universal health care and timely access to our health system is something that every Canadian deserves and should have. And it was a Liberal government that put universal health care in place. We can be very, very proud of that legacy. However, when it comes to the actual system, it is the provinces and the territories that manage and deliver care. The federal government provides transfers, but what we don't do enough of, and while I support the increase in transfers that we didn't have enough accountability for where that money was going. It can go into the general revenues of provinces and territories, and we have no way of knowing how that money is spent. And again, it's not to be accountable to the federal government. It's to be accountable to citizens. Citizens deserve to know how that money is being spent and what the outcomes they can expect are. One of the things that I did with the childcare agreements is that all of that money was contingent on specific objectives and outcomes for provinces and territories. That's what we need in healthcare. Canadians deserve timely access to a doctor. They deserve to have a family doctor or a primary care physician. And they deserve to know that when they get sick, when they need the healthcare system, it's there for them. Because our healthcare workers are working around the clock. They are doing everything they can to provide patients the care that they need, but the system itself needs to be modernized. The federal government can convene the provinces and territories. We can work with them to develop those objectives and those outcomes, but at the end of the day, it is the provinces and territories that are responsible for the delivery of healthcare, and they must be accountable to their citizens for how they are doing that.
Mr. Carney, you're up next, please.
So look at the service that we've received from our healthcare professionals over the course of the last 5 years. The enormous strains of working under the pandemic. Then the enormous strains that come after that on these professionals who are there at the front lines for us day in, day out, through the night, of a system that is short on resources, a system that has chronic care challenges as we age. We have a responsibility as the federal government to be part of the solution here. And we have an opportunity to make a systemic change because of technology. And if we have an openness, the provinces have an openness to use that in a way that empowers nurse practitioners, pharmacists, doctors, to provide a broader range of services to more people, more effectively. Last point, the federal government can help with that transition, can help with the leverage, and can help drive that change.
Ms. Freeland.
Well, Hannah, you asked, does money matter? And I do think it's really important for Liberals in particular to be clear, money does matter and money helps. And so I was really glad to be finance minister when we stepped up federal government support for the healthcare system, $200 billion. We saw that the healthcare system was under unbearable strain after COVID and that Canadians were suffering, and we stepped up and we made that commitment. I think we also have some real opportunities. Technology is a huge enabler, and I have seen in Toronto, at the University of Toronto, some amazing AI technologies being used to deliver better care in emergency rooms, better care for people after surgery. And not only is the care better, it costs less money and takes less time of trained healthcare professionals. So there are real opportunities. But I just want to conclude by saying something about the provinces. I think that transparency, is the winning ticket here. And having real transparency on healthcare outcomes across the country would help all Canadians, and it would help Canadians to see what's working and what isn't. But I do want to say to the premiers of the provinces and territories, I respect your work running the healthcare systems. It's really, really hard. And as Prime Minister, I would work really collaboratively with you and would recognize you want a healthcare system that works too, and you are the ones who are running it.
We are going to give 15 seconds to Ms. Gould and 15 seconds to Mr. Baylis before moving into the next theme.
Great, thank you. So first of all, my job as Prime Minister is to stand up for Canadians, whether that is to the opposition or whether that is to premiers. Of course, I would work collaboratively, but you have a responsibility to your citizens to deliver healthcare effectively. But one thing that I think all of us agree on this stage is protecting our public healthcare system. Pierre Poilievre is in the pockets of people who want to privatize our healthcare system for profit. That is not something that I think any Liberal stands for. We will protect our universal healthcare system for Canadians.
Frank Baylis.
So in the 1960s, when the system was designed, if you were unlucky enough to have diabetes, heart disease, cancer, you passed away much earlier. Today, we have extended your life expectancy. Now with that, that's the paradigm change that we need. Our system wasn't designed to look after those people, so we need to readapt it, redesign it to look after those people. That's how we'll have better healthcare, and it'll actually cost less.
Okay, I want to thank you for that third theme. We're going to move into our final theme of this evening. It has been whipping by, I must say. And this is, again, a one-minute question for everyone. And it is, again, a question from one Liberal from Alberta. Her name's Rhonda. She says, are you keeping, and we did hear this in the French debate last night, but not in the English so far, are you keeping or getting rid of the consumer tax? But to that, most of you here have supported this marquee government policy for years. If you agree with ending it, why do you agree with ending it now? So I am going to start with Mr. Carney on this one.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Rhonda, for this question, fellow Albertan. Yes, I support ending the consumer carbon tax, and to be absolutely clear, that's on consumers, it'd be on small businesses, it'd be on farms as well. The reason I do is twofold. One, politics is about people, and this has become too divisive for Canadians, okay? Secondly, the contribution of the consumer carbon tax is a little less than 10% of our emissions reductions. I've spent a substantial portion of my career working on these issues, and there are better ways to accomplish those emissions reductions, particularly on my proposal, is that big polluters will pay Canadians, not taxpayers, big polluters will pay Canadians for their emission reductions and will improve the options for and the ability of those companies, who are some of our most important companies, to get their own emissions down.
Okay, we're going to come back and debate this more, but Ms. Freeland, you are next with 1 minute.
Well, since we're talking about climate action, I do want to start by recognizing the role that I think history is going to judge very positively that Prime Minister Trudeau has played on climate action. He is the first Canadian Prime Minister to really move the dial. And under his leadership, we have become a country where the economy is growing while emissions are going down. That is a huge accomplishment for our children and grandchildren. On the consumer price on pollution, I was the first candidate to come out and say I would lift that. And the reason is really simple. democracy is about listening to people. And Canadians were very clear with us in conversations with me that they didn't think that policy worked for them. What we need is carrots. We need incentives to double down on the incentives I put in place, the Canada Growth Fund, the investment tax credits, to create a green transition that delivers jobs and growth for the Canadian economy. I know that we can do that, and I know that that's what Canadians need. And if we let Pierre Poilievre be elected, that will be the end of climate action in Canada.
Okay, we're on the 1-minute segment, and Mr. Baylis, you're up next.
Thank you. So I will implement a climate policy that will have a direct and tangible impact on fighting climate change. And it's going to be recognized, as we've all heard before, polluter pays model. And everyone is going to do their share, industries and individuals. Look, there's a cost to having our garbage collected. There's a cost to having water treatment plants. And we're happy to pay those costs because we have clean earth and we have clean water. And there will be a cost to having clean air. Anyone who tells you there's no cost to it is not being honest with you. So to answer your question about this carbon tax, presently it's not working because what it's doing is just circulating money around. So I'm going to adapt it. And what we're going to do is attack the problem directly. So I'm going to invest funds into programs and Canadian companies that are going to bring forth solutions to fight climate change directly.
And Karina Gould, you have said that you are not going to scrap the consumer carbon tax, that you will stop the increase in April. Maybe discuss that a bit.
Sure. Well, politics is also about leadership, and it's also about conviction. And I'm not going to abandon the fight against climate change because Pierre Poilievre is telling us to do that. I'm a mom of 2 young kids. I cannot leave a planet that is burning to them. I got into politics in 2015 because I wanted to be part of a government that fought climate change. And we did that. And we did that to great effect. And I am proud of that record. But I hear Canadians when they say that this policy is something that is challenging for them. And you know what? We didn't do a good job of talking about it. And when they are talking about the carbon tax, what are they talking about? They're talking about affordability. That's why we need a real affordability plan. It's not that they're against fighting climate change or they're against protecting the environment, but that also means that if you don't have the price on pollution, you don't have the rebate checks that millions of Canadians depend on every single year. If you have a plan to fight climate change, you also need to have a plan to fight affordability.
Yeah, we are. Okay, let's just get right into the debate because Mr. Carney, go.
I want to pick up on that point, last point, and really go to Pierre Poilievre, the difference between Pierre Poilievre's approach here. Axe the tax, he's got the T-shirt, he's got the slogan, that's all he'd do. He doesn't care about the rebate checks disappearing. He doesn't care about our businesses becoming more competitive. We started this evening talking about the absolute need for our country to diversify our trade, to build with new allies. Climate change, addressing climate change, and I've spent a huge part of my career addressing it, both in terms of policy and leading the largest clean energy investor in the world, okay? But a big part of climate change is about the economic opportunity. We will not have access to the European market unless we make the progress here. So we have to do 2 things. We have to supercharge some of the programs that have been put in place so businesses are getting their emissions down. We are a clean energy superpower, and we have to make all of those households whole on the rebate checks that they will no longer receive. That requires a middle-class tax cut. It requires additional measures, including, final point, polluters paying those households so their energy is more affordable and cleaner.
We have 2 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock, and we're going to have to stick to this. So I want to get through all of you. Ms. Freeland first.
Rhonda, you asked something very specific. What was the moment when I recognized that we needed a different approach? And I can tell you very specifically what that moment was. It was a meeting I had with Wab Kinew, the Premier of Manitoba, really shortly after he was elected. And he is a great progressive leader in, I would say, the tradition of prairie progressives. He says the economic horse has to pull the social cart. I love that. And he said to me, I believe in climate action, but I've just been through an election and the people of Manitoba are telling me that the way the consumer price on pollution works doesn't work for them. Can I do a deal with the federal government where we hit our targets, but we do it in a different way? And that, to me, is leadership. Leadership is listening to people. It is not being inflexible and not telling people what their lives are like, but hearing them. And so I really believe if we want climate action, which is essential, we have to listen to Canadians. And if we fail to do that, the threat is, the danger is that Pierre Poilievre will be elected and he will dismantle all of the excellent work we have done on climate. We have to recognize that. We have to show Canadians we hear them and that we're listening to what they tell us rather than telling them what they should be thinking.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there because we do have to stick to time now. Ms. Gould, you're up next.
Thank you so much. So just a couple of things with respect to my colleagues. Literally, the whole reason why we have the carbon tax backstop is because premiers across this country decided they didn't want to participate. So if Manitoba wants to participate, then the consumer price on carbon from the federal government disappears. That's what happens in Quebec. That's what happens in British Columbia. With respect to Mark and the middle class tax cut, the math just doesn't add up. If you are a middle-class individual, that tax cut is looking at about $800 a year. The carbon rebate for a family of four is $1,200 a year, and it doesn't help low-income or no-income Canadians. So it is really important to have a real conversation with Canadians, and if you don't have a plan for those checks, then we don't have a plan for affordability.
I'm going to come to you now, Mr. Baylis. We are going to go into the 1-minute segment, but it's a good follow-up to this. I know you wanted to jump in. To maximize Canada's energy advantage, new pipelines or other energy infrastructure probably is required here. What is your plan for that? And do you feel there is the private interest to get it done? Because a lot of private interest has now just gone, nope, not interested anymore.
So I have an energy security plan, which I've announced, and it's going to do a number of things. First of all, as I mentioned, we're going to build 2 pipelines. And why private industry is not interested is because what happens is every time a new government comes in, they change all the rules. There's no certainty. So my idea here is that the federal government will take on the responsibility of having the approvals for the 2 corridors. We'll work with the provinces and we'll work with the Indigenous communities, get all the approvals in place, and then go to tender so people can know with certainty that they can build these 2 pipelines. That's one area of energy security. Another one is I want to invest heavily in nuclear energy, small modular reactors. Canada used to be a world leader with our CANDU reactors and nuclear energy. We have to retake that position. Third thing I want to do is invest in transmission lines. We don't have transmission lines going across the whole country. With the electrification of our economy, we're going to need those. So those are 3 points I want to bring to the table.
Frank Baylis, thank you kindly for that. And Mark Carney, you're up next. 1 minute.
I'll go back to where we started. We're in a crisis. We need to act. We need to act to build this economy. And part of those actions is or should be around our energy sector. I would convene, as part of First Minister's, discussion of the projects of national interest, which would include both clean and conventional energy, would include pipelines, getting consensus around those projects that we're going to move forward on. Because we are a federation, we need multiple levels of government, but we need speed. And we need the federal government to move with speed. We also need to do, and we can do, and can lead in areas such as carbon capture and storage. We can lead in displacing the 70% of oil in Eastern Canada that comes from the United States that is using the money to threaten us. So this is part of a bigger set of opportunities for Canada. I'd help to lead those changes, and I would do it right from the start.
Ms. Freeland, your 1 minute starts.
I do want to go back to the critical moment our country is facing to the existential threat that President Trump poses to our economy, to our sovereignty. And Canadians get that. One of the reasons I am so confident that we can get through this and that we can get a good deal, that actually we can successfully negotiate with President Trump, is because we are an energy superpower. Uranium, hydro, wind, traditional energy. This is a strength, and we need to double down on it. I am very proud to be the minister that got access for our energy to the Pacific. That diversification is so valuable today. It gives us an alternative to the United States. We need that more than ever. I believe there is the national will right now in Canada to double down on our energy strength, to use that as a source of economic security and also of national security, including as something that we can offer to our European and Asian allies whose support we need for our own security.
Okay. Karina Gould, 1 minute.
Thank you. Energy security is imperative not just for our economic security, but also for our sovereignty. And as Canadians, we know how to do something really well. We know how to skate to where the puck is going. And so that means that we need to have a conversation right now about what securing our energy future looks like, both with traditional energy, but also with new renewable energy. If we think about where we're going to be in 5, 10 years, where our trading partners are going to be in 5 or 10 years, we have to have a real conversation about what Canada can provide for Canadians, but also for the world. I'm from Southern Ontario, and we have incredible technology when it comes to nuclear. We have an amazing opportunity to build renewable energy here at home, but also to export our energy and our expertise around the world. This is the conversation for Canadians to be having right now, and to do it with provinces and territories and with Indigenous peoples.
We are going to go into that was the 1 minute debate. We are going to go into the 5 minute final debate of the evening. And this is a question, you can take it wherever you want. How will you differentiate yourself from the current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau? Start with yourself, Ms. Freeland.
I'm actually going to carry on with the previous theme because
I still might come back and ask you, though.
We haven't touched on something really important to Canada, and that actually is an integral part of our energy security future and is a really positive story. And that is Indigenous participation in energy projects. One of the things I was so proud to be able to do as finance minister is create a $5 billion Indigenous loan guarantee program to allow Indigenous direct participation, ownership of natural resource projects, energy projects. This is transformational for Canada. And I think that we really need to embrace the fact that we are a country that can move forward with Indigenous prosperity. And we are a country whose path to reconciliation can include Indigenous people in Canada being partners in building the energy security we need today more than ever.
Okay, thanks. And I will come back with that other question. So I'm going to go back to my original question in this debate. How will you differentiate yourself from Prime Minister Trudeau?
Sure. Let me just first start by saying that I think it's wonderful what you raised, Chrystia. It's just that Indigenous reconciliation is about more than a relationship with natural resources. And this is something that I think we can be extraordinarily proud of, the legacy that Prime Minister Trudeau has put in place when it comes to reconciliation. And we need to be very mindful that a Pierre Poilievre-led Conservative government will back away and backtrack on this really important relationship that Canada has with Indigenous peoples. And I also just want to say that I'm actually really proud of a lot of the work that we did as a government, whether it was the Canada Child Benefit that has lifted over 500,000 kids out of poverty, the early learning and childcare agreements, or the work that we did on fighting climate change. I'm proud of that legacy and that record, and I think all Liberals can be proud of that. Where I see a big difference is in making sure that we stay and I stay connected to the grassroots. And this is something that as Liberals, I want to talk to you specifically about. We need to hear your voices. We need to hear your ideas, because it is always the Liberal membership, the Liberal grassroots, that provides the next big idea for Canada and for Canadians. And so my pledge to you is to ensure that we have a robust and vibrant party that is connected in our communities, listening to Canadians, and making sure that we can build that future that we want and lead Canada ambitiously into the 21st century.
So that's how you'll differentiate yourself from Mr. Trudeau?
I'm very proud of the record that we have. We've made some mistakes, absolutely. Nobody is perfect, but we've done a lot of good things for this country, and I think we need to build on that success. I can pinpoint the moment following the pandemic when inflation was getting out of control, and Canadians were saying to all of us collectively as a government, they were saying we need help with the cost of living, and we were too late to the game to address those real needs. My pledge to you is to listen to you and to respond to what your needs are today and for the future.
Thank you, Ms. Gould. Mr. Baylis, you're up next. How will you differentiate yourself from Mr. Trudeau?
So I would say that I'm the candidate here that is the most distant from Mr. Trudeau. I was elected, it was over 6 years ago since I've been in the government. And then I was not a minister, so I've not been a minister with Mr. Trudeau's government, nor have I been an economic advisor. Where I will differentiate myself greatly is that I'll be focused much more on the economy. I'll be focused on creating wealth. I'll be focused on getting more money into Canadians' pockets. That's what I'm good at. I'm also going to look at building an innovation-based economy. So I really wanted to do that. That's going to be my main focus. You need both when you're in government. You need wealth creation and you need wealth redistribution. We've done a lot of wealth redistribution to the point that we're renouncing programs we can't even pay for. And we're letting programs such as healthcare fall apart. So what I want to do is get back in there. I'm a big supporter of these programs, so I want to make sure we have the funds to pay for them. That's going to be where I'm going to be much different from the previous government.
Okay, Mr. Baylis, thank you for that. Mr. Carney, you're up next.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Look, I'm different in the following respects. First, focus on the economy. Laser focus on the economy, and that means good jobs, people's wages growing faster than inflation. It means getting prices down. It means building homes. It means building a future for this country. Secondly, I'm much more hands-on. I'm much more of a hands-on person, hands-on manager. I focus on results and getting things done. Thirdly, and I've heard this, I'm fortunate to have support in the caucus. I hear directly from the supporters about more regular and two-way dialogue with the caucus. I meet with my supporters virtually during the course of this leadership campaign to hear their ideas, to hear their energy, to hear what's going on, what they're seeing on the ground, to share my perspectives in order to move forward.
Okay, and Ms. Freeland, I am going to come back to you on this one. I only have about 30 seconds on this. How would you differentiate yourself after being in the Justin Trudeau government for all of these years?
Well, first of all, we as Liberals have to be proud of the great things our government has done. National System of Early Learning and Childcare, Canada Child Benefit, support for seniors, CETA, NAFTA. We have done a lot, and we need to remind Canadians about that. But, you know, for me, this campaign has been a personal liberation, and I am my own person, and it is great. I personally do not believe in a style of leadership, which is a one-man band. I think that the best kind of leadership is collaborative and listening, and that's how I'm running my campaign. I believe that we have to be practical and we have to focus on jobs and growth. Okay. But most importantly, I am a ferocious mother, and I will fight for Canada with the same ferocity that I fight for my kids. I will fight for your kids too. And the reason I am running is I am the leader who can stand up to Donald Trump and win.
Okay, we still have closing statements as well. So this is that opportunity for each candidate. I may have to take some time away because of that. And Ms. Freeland, you are chosen as number one to have your closing statement first. So your minute 30 is there. We might have to clip it a little bit.
Well, first of all, I do hope Donald Trump, who takes a keen interest in Canada, is watching this debate, because what he will hear from all the Liberals is We believe in Canada. We are not going to capitulate, and we are going to fight for our country. And Canadians across the country are coming together to fight for Canada. Hockey fans are belting out "O Canada." Restaurants pulling U.S. wine from their menus. Snowbirds not flying south this winter. Our country is standing strong, smart, and united. I am so grateful to be here with 3 other Liberals who love Canada and to have the chance to talk to 400,000 Liberals who love Canada too. Now, Pierre Poilievre, he actually agrees with Trump. They both say that Canada is broken. We know that's not true. We are leading a great wave of Canadian patriotism. Let's use that passion to make our amazing country even better. I know we can do it. Let's commit tonight to fight for Canada. All 4 of us on this stage, all of us Liberals, all of us Canadians. Together, we will win.
Chrystia Freeland, thank you so much for your closing statements. Now, Karina Gould, your time.
This is a critical time for our party and for our country, and we have to meet this moment. We will only win the next election by being Liberals, proudly, not Conservative light. Not by running from the progress we've made, not by putting forward ideas that just tinker around the edges. We deserve a leader who is honest with Canadians, who can unite us around big ideas, and who has the political experience to deliver real solutions to the problems we face. A leader with a track record of standing up to bullies, a leader who won't back down. I've always been someone who will stand by what I believe in, say what I mean, and fight for what is right. I've made the hard decisions and stood up for Canadians. I believe Canada is the best place in the world to start a family, grow a business, and build a future. Because we are a nation of dreamers and doers, creators and innovators. Because Canada is where opportunity, empathy, and progress walk hand in hand. I have a vision for Canada, one that will allow us to deal with the problems we face today and be ready for those we'll face tomorrow. It's time for a new generation of leadership that understands you and is focused on you. I'm here for Canada, today, tomorrow, and for years to come. I'm the leader for the future, and the future starts now. Thank you.
Karina Gould, thank you so much. Frank Baylis, you're up next.
Thank you. So Canada is a country of wide open spaces and big ideas. And with my plan, we will build a strong and resilient economy that will benefit all Canadians. We will improve our healthcare system, and it will become the best healthcare system in the world. We will modernize our federal government so they can deliver its services to our citizens in a very effective and efficient manner. And yes, we will repel and we will overcome the attacks of President Trump. Now, in the last 10 years, the world has changed profoundly. And now, as a country, we need to go in a new direction. As you look to choose your next leader, I would ask you to reflect on these 3 points. I have the best, most credible plan to build a strong, resilient economy. I'm best suited to defeat Pierre Poilievre and expose him for exactly what he is. He's a career politician who likes to make up slogans and nothing else. And I have the background, the experience, and the expertise to firmly stand up to President Trump. I will successfully defend our nation. I will defend it against his attacks on our economy, on our culture, and yes, our sovereignty. My fellow citizens, I represent that new direction. So let's be bold. Let's be ambitious. Together we will build a proud and prosperous Canada. My name is Frank Baylis, and to make this happen, I need your support.
Mr. Baylis, thank you so much for your closing statement. And finally, we go to Mark Carney.
Thank you, Hannah. Fellow Liberals, my fellow Canadians, from coast to coast to coast, you've told me that you're anxious in the face of an uncertain future. You've told me that you're looking for positive change, that you want a leader that bridges divides. You want a plan that defends our interests and creates opportunities for everyone. Every experience in my life, whether by accident or design, has led me to this moment. I'm ready. It's true, I'm not a career politician. I am a pragmatist who knows how to get things done. I've managed economic crises, built strong economies, and run tough negotiations. And this gives me the experience to lead Canada at this crucial time. We're facing a very different world to the one we've known all our lives. The Canadians are ready to unite and stand up for our country. We will seize this moment to win for Canada. I love our country. Canada has given me everything. My family, my education, my values. And in return, I'm ready to give everything for Canada. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the English Liberal leadership debate. I want to thank all 4 candidates for a great job this evening. Voting does start tomorrow. I know. And then the announcement of the next leader of the Liberal Party will be made on March the 9th in Ottawa. So congratulations to all of you for putting your name in to do this, and look forward to seeing the results. Thank you kindly, and thank you for watching.
And thank you, Hannah, for doing a great job.
Yeah.
And that does bring to an end the second and final Liberal leadership debate. Welcome back to our special coverage of that debate and some post-game analysis. I'm Vassy Kapelos in Ottawa tonight. We've been listening over the past 2 hours, and we will certainly bring you the highlights of the past 2 hours. But right now, I want to bring in our panelists who have been listening intently alongside myself and all of you. We've got Scott Reid here. He's a former communications director to Liberal Prime Minister Paul Martin, former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC, and former Leader of the NDP, Tom Mulcair, rounds us out. Hi, everybody. Good to see you again after this kind of two-hour sojourn. I'll start with you, Scott. Just right away for you, the headline out of this debate is?
Mark Carney really took control of the debate. In contrast to last night, where his French really limited him, tonight, particularly on Trump, on tariffs, the whole first 45 minutes of the debate played into his strengths. I really thought that he made the case for why he's the leader. He barely even engaged the other leaders, the other candidates, to be honest. I thought he was really looking past them and playing to the general election. So I thought that was the big takeaway. He just looked like he was in complete control of this debate as compared to last night, where he was just struggling to get past.
Yeah, it was interesting that going into this, Lisa, we had been wondering if there would be more differences on display, if that, because he is the front runner, he would be on the defense a little bit more. Really the only person that tried to create some, differences or put forward any differences, I thought, was Karina Gould. Again, Chrystia Freeland didn't really do a lot of that, nor did Frank Baylis. What was your impression of kind of the big headline out of this to you?
That Canadians aren't going to really be getting much change if they're seeking a change election from this crew of Liberal leadership contenders. The last question was very telling for me. It was, how do you differentiate yourself from the Prime Minister? And you had 2 cabinet ministers do a complete duck and cover on the question, to the point where Hannah had to go back to Chrystia Freeland and ask her again for it. I think Mark Carney made his best attempt to try to be the different one than the rest of them, but I actually thought that Mr. Baylis made the best response in terms of why he was different from Mr. Trudeau, saying, I was there, then I left, and I've been out for the longest time. The biggest surprise for me was Mr. Baylis, to be honest. I thought that for the one that's supposed to be the afterthought for, kind of contender, he was thoughtful up there, and he put forth, I would say, the blue Liberal point of view.
I thought that the last question, picking up on Lisa's point, Tom, when we had anticipated coming into this that this could be for a broader audience than just Liberals, was one of the more important questions, right? Maybe the most important question, particularly if this next election is going to be about Donald Trump, but also about change, as we have been talking about for years now, or months at least. What did you think of the way in which the candidates answered that question?
They crab walked sideways towards any criticism they had of each other. For example, on defense spending, Mark Carney has a longer timeline, was being attacked by both Freeland and Gould, and both he and Baylis gave a pretty convincing argument as to why their 2027 date was unrealistic. And then he got in a really good shot. He said, look, 80% of our defense spending is in the States. I'm going to change that. And that takes some time. It takes a bit of management. So I thought that that was one of his better moments. The weakest moment for all of them was when they tried to debate climate change. You would have thought that given the fact that it had been one of the underpinnings of Poilievre's very successful run for the past year and a half, that they would have had something to propose instead. And honestly, I teach this stuff. I work hard on it. I believe I know a lot of it. And I was listening to the four of them. I started going, okay, they've all been talking about the average middle-class Canadian. I would love to do a focus group of 12 average middle-class Canadians, make them listen to the four of them talking about the proposals they were making to deal with climate change and reduce greenhouse gases in Canada, and ask them what it meant. And you know what? I think the answer would be a blank stare. I found it utterly incomprehensible, and it shows that they're doing the same thing that Poilievre used to do to them. He took this blanket statement, axe the tax, no subtlety. Now they're saying, well, we don't like axe the tax. We want to do something about climate change. And then the question is, what? And the answer is a word salad.
There were a lot more questions, Scott, about the economy in particular, but also I found that is where Mark Carney tried to create the biggest distance between himself and the current government. One of the lines, and we'll have it in a second to play, but in particular around the last 5 years, saying the last 5 years, the only reason for economic growth was government spending in immigration. I thought that stood out to me. And let me just play a little bit of some of the other moments kind of sandwiched together that we cut together.
And I'm going to bring fiscal discipline to Ottawa. And yes, we're going to have to stop running deficits. It has a direct impact on the value of our dollar, and that has a direct impact on affordability.
You know, when my colleagues talk about households, I talk about families. When they talk about, you know, the macro picture, I talk about what it means for individuals.
I have the experience, the plan, and the guts to stand up to Trump. We need a leader who understands the seriousness of the challenge and is ready to meet it.
So our economy was weak before we got to the point of these threats from President Trump. That's why we need big changes. That's the reason I'm here.
I'll get both you, Scott, and Lisa on this, because I could only imagine being the Conservatives listening to particularly what Frank Baylis and Mark Carney were saying during this around the economy and being like, well, that sounds familiar. It was super interesting.
Well, I mean, I really thought that, again, Carney kind of dominated this. This was in that sort of first third of the debate where I thought that all of his credentials that he was able to marshal and link to why he's here now, why he's the right guy for this moment, I thought all that was on display. And I'll say another thing. And if you put it all together, what Carney was saying in particular, there's a huge consensus all of a sudden. I mean, really, you know, Pierre Poilievre can say, well, look, I was right all along and now everybody's mimicking me, maybe. But nevertheless, there's suddenly this rush to consensus. No carbon tax, no capital gains changes. We need to diversify our markets. We need to make certain that we deal with internal trade barriers. There's kind of this general consensus around what the broad priorities are going to be, leaving you really only with a collision over, well, which one of these people do I trust most to actually implement this agenda? And of course, at the top of it is taking on Trump. And I think that's Carney's strategy, you know, and I think tonight he was in effect trying to neutralize the ownership of Poilievre on some of those issues and say, now, if we're all in violent agreement, I would like to submit myself as the candidate best qualified to actually achieve some progress here. And it's going to be interesting to see how Poilievre handles that, because so far they haven't really had a response to that.
Do you think, Lisa, that is essentially what Carney is trying to do? And what do you expect the counter from the Conservatives to be?
I can tell you what my response to that is. I mean, it's like they all discovered religion on the stage, that they've made mistakes and that it's not the way that things should have happened. And I knew before that this was the wrong choice, or we shouldn't have gone down this path, and their government was in trouble before Trump. Well, why didn't any of them have a word with Justin Trudeau about that? Why didn't any of them actually speak up to Justin Trudeau and say something, I don't know, publicly, call him out on it, so we didn't go so far down that path that we're in the situation that we're in now? So if they're saying that I'm the one to take on Trump because I'm going to stand up to them, not a single one of them can say that they stood up to Justin Trudeau. So how can you believe them?
Tom, I'll give you the last word on this, and then we're anticipating each of the candidates will actually scrum, as we had talked about earlier, with reporters, so they'll take questions from reporters. I think Frank Baylis is up first, so when he does get up to the microphone, we'll head over there. Tom, your thoughts on this?
A couple of times, Karina Gould tried to paint her adversaries, her main ones, Freeland and Carney, as conservative light. She didn't name them, but she used that expression several times. And she was talking about the importance of being progressive. So she's trying to stake out some turf for herself, and I thought she did rather well tonight. She tried to do some of that stuff in the French debate last night. It really fell flat, but I thought she was scoring quite a few points tonight. Just having the ability and the knowledge to say something as simple as, look, let's start calling things by their name, and we'll talk about people who live in poverty. And you have to have been around for a while and know what those issues are about to be able to talk that clearly the way she did. I think that there was something also that they were trying to take a shot at Carney a couple of times by referencing him. Oh, yes, you were a good deputy minister when you were with Paul Martin. You know, that's a way of saying, well, we're politicians. We've been ministers. You were a good deputy minister. I think that fell a little bit flat, because what Carney was talking about when he referenced Paul Martin was the fact that they had balanced the budget, and they were very good fiscal managers, and the country was doing well. And right now we're not. And so I think that that's one of the biggest problems that Chrystia Freeland had. She tried to go through the litany of other G7 countries that are not as well off as we are, and now things. Canadians don't believe the economy has been well handled by the Liberals, full stop. And anybody like tonight with Chrystia Freeland trying to defend the record that blankly, the way she tried to do it, I think that also fell flat.
Okay, Mr. Baylis has just stepped up to the microphone, so we're going to head back over to Montreal and listen in live.
Pipeline. I think people should look at that and say to themselves, okay, what is he really doing? He's trying to reduce the cost of energy to the Americans, because that's going to really have a positive impact on his economy. So when he says, I'm going to put 25% tariffs on every export from Canada, keep in mind that almost 50% of it is energy. 50% almost is energy. He's not going to tax that at all. That's why I've been calling for us to call out Mr. Trump and say, look, enough of these fake threats. We're going to call your bluff. That's what I want to do. Now, as respects to Keystone, I think it's a wonderful idea. That's good for us.
On Keystone XL, the pipeline, I would be very happy if that were built. That would give us another market to sell our resources to. That said, and this would be very important, that we build pipelines to also bring natural gas from east to west in order to diversify our markets. Good evening, Mr. Baylis. Question? On the same line of ideas, is Mr. Trump's will to bring this Keystone XL project back? Would that change your approach in terms of diversing markets in Canada for exporting oil to other places? Answer, not at all. It would be very important for us to build those two pipelines to bring gas from Alberta, one to the east for European markets and the other west to Asian markets. That will be a good thing for our economy, good for us to diversify, and good for the environment. So we'll win on three fronts. Also on Keystone, that's good news, but it's Trump we're talking about. So it's too early, and we need to see all the details before we can say that we're going to go on with that. So these are the details with Mr. Trump always. As a follow-up, in this debate, as in the French debate yesterday evening, There were many common points on a number of issues, notably on Canada's response and what that response should be to Mr. Trump's threats. How do you think that you differentiated yourself from the other candidates? Well, I'm the only one who has 40 years of negotiating with the Americans. So I've already come up against that approach before, that approach that Trump has taken. As I've emphasized before, unfortunately, our government has already made some mistakes. The Prime Minister never should have gone to President Trump's personal home. He never should have been given anything with concerning the border before we negotiated something about that. And we can't take that back now. But the way that things were handled with Trump, I would change completely. And the fact is, I've already done that in negotiations. I know what to do. I know what to expect. And I have the expertise and experience that, frankly, the others don't have.
The party uses a ranked ballot. Are you going to direct your supporters as to how they should rank other candidates on their ballot? If so, how?
No, I don't have any plans to do that. I think that I'm trying to sell myself to Canadians. What I'm trying to do is tell them who I am, what I stand for, and where I'm coming from. And I'll let the people make their decisions with respect to ranked ballots. I understand there's sometimes des ententes. People get together and say, let's do this or let's do that. That's not been the game that I'm playing. I understand that people might say I'm a bit of a dark horse. That's fine. But I can tell you, every time I come out and every time I get a bit of media, all I get is inundated with more and more people want to support me. So I actually think that things are going very well for me. My only challenge is time, quite frankly, because I'm sure that the more time I have, the better and better it's going for me. So I'm really focused on winning it, not trying to make a deal or position myself in any way.
Right. If you win, the last two elections have ended up with minority governments. Would you be willing to? Would you ever seek a supply and confidence agreement with another party, so yours could stay in power?
So, first things first, I'd have to win the leadership. I haven't won that yet. I tend to focus on one thing at a time. The second thing I would say is that today, just because of the threats of Donald Trump, these are very fundamental threats to our economy and our sovereignty. We have to look at government a slightly different way. So I would be ready to work with anyone so long as they're willing to work together to repulse and protect Canada against the threat of Donald Trump. Having said this, clearly you have someone like Mr. Poilievre, and he's focused strictly on himself. He's not interested in doing what's right for the country. I don't even think he's interested in doing what's right for his own party. He wants to be prime minister at all costs. And so I'd be very surprised if he was willing to do any kind of entente, any kind of deal. But I would only be looking at doing something that would be good for Canadians. Not good for the Liberal Party, but good for Canada.
Merci beaucoup. Je veux juste savoir, il y a à peu près combien de questions pour que...
How many questions?
Il y a une file d'environ 20 reporters.
Okay,
There's a line of 20 reporters. Could I please ask you to limit to one question per person so that we can have as many people as possible? We'll be fair to everyone. Yes? Question. What's your plan to be a Liberal candidate in the next election in your riding? Well, I'm not the leader yet, but if I don't win that riding, I will say, first of all, that I'm a long-standing Liberal, 48 years. I've had all kinds of positions in the Liberal Party. And for 4 of those 48, I was an MP. So I will undoubtedly be involved. I don't know if I'll win it or not, and I don't know if the new leader would want me as a candidate or not. So it's not up to me to make that decision if I'm not the leader. But you will present yourself even if you're not the leader? Well, if the new leader wants me to. My commitment is very clear on that. I will be involved in one way or another to support the Liberal Party, no doubt. Next question?
Harry North for the Montreal Gazette. You spoke on building pipelines. How will you work with provinces who may not be as supportive of these?
So I think that we have not done a good job of selling pipelines. We talked about this yesterday, for example, the Energy East pipeline, which the Legault government gave a bit of pushback and the federal government just threw up their hands right away and gave up. Now, what I would tell people and what I would tell Quebecers, you asked me how I do this, is I say, look, there's 3 ways oil moves. One is by boat, one is by train, and one is by pipeline. Now, with respect to boat, that oil coming up the St. Lawrence, which is so critical to us, one leak, it's an ecological disaster of epic proportions. Now, when it comes to trains, in Quebec, we've already had Lac Mégantic. So we know how dangerous that is. We know how dangerous it is. The safest way to move oil is by pipeline. So I would make that argument, and I would have those discussions with the provinces, the premiers, and I think we could convince them, especially given the present threat that we're all feeling from President Trump.
Thanks very much. We're going to, just one question, sorry, per person, because I only have 2 minutes left on the clock. Thank you. One next question, please. Was that it? Okay, then we can take a second question then. All right. If there's no more questions, then that's a wrap then. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
All right, that is former Montreal area Liberal MP Frank Baylis, one of the 4 people in contention for the Liberal leadership. We are awaiting the next candidate who will step up to the microphone in a few moments' time, and that's Karina Gould. She's the former government House leader. My colleague Michael Couture is in the so-called spinner's room in Montreal, inside where all of this is taking place. Mike, tell me what the campaigns are telling you about how they think the debate went for them as we await Ms. Gould.
Yeah, probably no shock to you, Vassy, but all of them think that they won that debate, as they would try and spin and try and tell us how good their candidate did. I mean, it's interesting when you consider how all of them are focusing on different things. One, Karina Gould, her team is basically saying that, look, she showed that type of strength, and I think she's at the microphone now, so maybe we'll have her speak.
Okay, we're going to listen in live. Thanks, Mike.
Look, this was an easy debate. This is a debate amongst friends, amongst family, amongst Liberals. The real debate against Pierre Poilievre, against Yves-François Blanchet, against Jagmeet Singh, that's going to come in the election. And we need to ensure that whoever is leading our party is debate ready in English and French. And what became clear to me both last night and tonight, that I'm the only person on that stage that is ready to take on the opposition, to fight for Canadians, and to win as a Liberal.
Next question. Hi, Cal Duggan at the Canadian Press. Was the carbon tax a bad policy, or was it just marketed badly? And just so we're clear, how long do you think that you would keep it for if you were actually Prime Minister?
So we did not do a good job as a government about talking about the price on pollution. And we allowed Pierre Poilievre to take up space on the price on pollution and, quite frankly, to mislead Canadians. What was really happening was inflation. And we didn't hear Canadians when they were saying to us, I'm having a hard time making ends meet. And Pierre Poilievre got in there and he misled Canadians on the price of pollution. So my plan is to freeze the planned increase, to cancel the planned increase, to ensure that we can give Canadians that break that they need. But I'm not going to take checks away from millions of people who rely on that money. So this is a good policy that does 2 things. It tackles climate change, it reduces our emissions, and it provides greater affordability for Canadians. So just because Pierre Poilievre says something doesn't mean it's true, and most of the time, it's not.
Next question.
Alex Ballingall with the Toronto Star. I think it was your closing statement. You mentioned conservative light, that the Liberals don't need conservative light. Was that something directed at Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland? And can you expand on what you meant by that being something that the Liberals shouldn't be doing right now?
Look, what we've heard from some of my colleagues is that they are taking some conservative ideas and putting them in their platform. And you know what? That's okay if they're good ideas. But when it comes to some of the stuff that they're putting forward, they're not going to make a meaningful and tangible difference in the lives of Canadians. And Liberals win elections when we are true to Liberal values, when we are bold and ambitious and have a plan and a vision for this country. And so I am proud to be a Liberal. I'm proud to be a Canadian, and I'm not going to compromise my values, compromise my convictions, because I think that's what the polling wants.
Olivia.
Oui. Voilà. Certaines de mes collègues ont pris des
Some of my colleagues have taken ideas and opinions from the Conservatives. They're good ideas. That's okay. And it's not just taking those ideas because they think the Conservatives will like them. I'm a long-standing Liberal. I'm a proud Liberal. And I'm proud of what we have done as a Liberal Party to improve the lives of Canadians. Liberals win elections when we act as Liberals, when we are true to our values and true to our convictions. And I'm not seeking to change because polls are saying something else.
You said during the debate that Liberals have lost touch with young people. Aren't you helping other parties defeat your government when you're saying things like that?
No, I'm just being honest. Look, one of the things that I think Canadians have been frustrated about, and quite frankly, I've been frustrated about, is like sometimes you just got to say the thing. You just got to say what people are feeling, and you have to be okay to say that. I mean, that's one of the things that I've heard from people is they're like, stop talking about things in policy terms or government terms. Talk about them in ways that are meaningful to folks. And if we don't identify the problem and talk about it, we're never going to find the solution. And so for me, it's been a couple of years where I have felt that we have lost touch. But I think what this leadership race offers, I think what my leadership candidacy offers is an opportunity to reconnect with Canadians, to listen to them, and to make sure that we remain in touch with them. I've always been a grassroots politician. That's what propelled us into office in 2015, and it's what's going to make sure that a new Liberal government is there in 2025.
Bonjour, Madame Gould, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
From Radio-Canada, question. If you were Prime Minister, what would be your deficit? Would you keep it at 60 billion? Would you bring it down to 40 billion? Could you give me a figure, please? Answer, no, I can't give you a number. And that's because we are facing potentially our greatest challenge. We are facing perhaps the greatest economic challenge in the history of our country. That could happen in a week, and we need to ensure that the federal government is there to support Canadians. And that's helping them with their economic needs, protecting industry from Donald Trump's threats. So I couldn't be honest with you right now if I were to give you a number. And that's because we don't know what we're dealing with. And my commitment to Canadians is to reassure them that I will be fiscally responsible and I will also protect them. Question, do you think 60 billion deficit is too big? Answer, why 62 billion? Why is 40 billion of that compensation for First Nations that the federal government owes to the Indigenous peoples of this country? That's not something that was spent last year. That was counted for years to come. Once again, it's about being honest and transparent with Canadians. That's what I stand up for, and that's what I commit to. Question, can you just talk about spending? To be clear? Answer, I will ensure that our spending is responsible. But now is not the time to make cuts. That is Pierre Poilievre's plan. And once again, when we are facing such an extreme threat to our economy, it's not the time to upset the public service. It's a time to ensure that we have the services and programs to support Canadians. And that's because I know that we're going to come out winning in this tariff war with the U.S., but we need good jobs that Canadians to return to.
Michael Couture, CTV News. I noticed that you were one of the only people on that stage being the aggressor, specifically going after Mark Carney. What was your strategy behind that tonight in terms of making a mark and going specifically after Mr. Carney?
Look, I pushed all of my colleagues. I pushed Frank when it came to supporting our Canadian Armed Forces. I pushed Chrystia when it came to Indigenous reconciliation, and on her record when it comes to the agreements on healthcare with provinces and territories. Again, I said I support those transfers when it comes to healthcare, but we need to ensure that we get a good deal for Canadians and that Canadians have accountability and transparency. And I pushed Mark on his economic ideas, because this has to be a debate of ideas. The whole point of this Liberal leadership race is so that Liberals have a chance to see who we are as candidates, to make an informed decision about the vision that we are putting forward. And this is just a test run for the real debate that's going to come in the election. And Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, Jagmeet Singh, they're not going to be nearly as nice as I was. I had kid gloves on this morning, or this evening. You know, when it comes to the real debate, it was very clear to me that last night and tonight, I am the only one of the candidates who's ready to take on those opposition leaders tomorrow if needed.
How?
Oui. Alors, ce soir, j'ai dit que je vais poser des
This evening, I said that I was going to be asking difficult questions. I was going to be pushing my colleagues. And that's because this Liberal leadership race is an opportunity for Liberal Party supporters to make a real choice, to know where we are on the major issues and the challenges that Canadians are facing. And I pushed back on everyone. I pushed back on Frank, on the issue of the race. I pushed back on Christian on reconciliation and health, and I pushed back on Mark on economic issues. Yesterday and today was only the beginning. This was just the first opportunity for us to have this debate. Because I was very polite this evening compared to Pierre Poilievre, Yves-François Blanchet, or Jagmeet Singh. The real debate will come during the general election. And what I saw yesterday and today is that I'm the only candidate already ready to go into a debate with the leaders of the opposition parties in French or English.
You see the numbers and that there are two presumptive frontrunners right now, and were you trying to make a mark tonight for this final push?
What is very clear is that I am the only candidate who is ready to lead this party into the next election, who is ready to take on Pierre Poilievre and win the next election. I have the experience, I have the chops, I have the guts, and I have the capacity to do that. What Liberals are looking for is somebody who can fight and who can win. I have always stood up for Canadians. I will always stand up for Canadians, and I'm going to win us the next election. Thank you very much. Merci tout le monde. Bonne soirée. Thank you.
All right, that's former Government House Leader Karina Gould at the end there, taking some questions from our very own Mike LeCouture. And Mike, I think you're with us live now. I think he's just able to turn around and pivot from where he was asking those questions. Some interesting answers, like she went harder at her colleagues in her answers there than she did on the stage. I think your observation was accurate that she was really the only one kind of going at them even in any capacity on the stage. But wow, she kind of really hit there.
Yeah, and interesting how she said that basically she used kid gloves tonight, whereas, you know, a real debate with other leaders from other parties would be a lot tougher, in saying that she is the only one that has the chops and the one that can really lead this party to any kind of election win. I mean, I think the question, you know, that was not answered is whether or not she's starting to see the numbers and deciding that she had to make a mark in order to make a move in this race right now at this moment. As we know, there are less than 2 weeks to go before March 9th and less than a couple of minutes before Chrystia Freeland takes the microphone behind me. So I'm going to let her have the stage now, I believe.
It's like you have eyes in the back of your head, Mike. Let's head over to Chrystia Freeland taking questions.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Chris Brown, CBC. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
Mr. Carney went after Justin Trudeau's economic record tonight. A lot of that is your economic record. What do you say to him, please?
I say that it is extremely important for Liberals not to parrot conservative talking points. The reality is Canada is not broken. The reality is Canada has a strong fiscal position, a AAA credit rating, the lowest debt and deficit in the G7, an economic recovery from the COVID recession, which is much stronger and faster than Harper's recovery from the 2008 recession, 17 months rather than 24. There is work to do now, absolutely. Now is the time we need to focus on jobs and growth. But the central issue for the Canadian economy and for our existence as a country right now is Donald Trump. This is an existential moment. My campaign is built around that. It is built around the recognition that this is a challenge to our existence as a country, and it is built around a plan to meet that challenge, and it is built around the reality that I am uniquely the person who can meet that challenge. I've been foreign minister, so I know how to negotiate security deals with our partners. I've been trade minister, and so I know how to negotiate economic deals around the world. I've done it. And I was Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs during COVID and led a true Team Canada effort in a challenging time. So I know how to lead a united, strong, and smart response. And what I will push back on is an idea that somehow, because we can't change President Trump, that we ought not to negotiate with him. Of course we can't change him, but we can outwit him. And I know exactly how to do that. And that is why I am the best person to be leader of the Liberal Party and the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Mr. Trump, after saying he doesn't need Canadian oil today, I believe said that he would like Keystone XL to be resurrected. Do you support the resurrection of Keystone XL, and how would you get that project back?
See, it proves my point. That proves the point with which I began the debate. What I said at the beginning of the debate was Canadians shouldn't be scared of the United States. We need them, but they also need us. And that dependence that they have on us as a market and also as a source of things they desperately need, like energy, is a source of strength. And that's why we cannot be defeatist when it comes to President Trump. And we need to know that we can outwit him, that we can stand up to Trump, and we can win. When it comes to Keystone XL, I have always been a supporter of that project, and the holdup is entirely on the U.S. side. If the Americans want to build that pipeline, good luck to them. And that will actually add to our national security. It will be another avenue of their energy dependence on us.
Prochaine question.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Zachary Chung for City News. In the conversation about Donald Trump's tariffs, you said that Canada's response should see American farmers complaining about the Canadian products that they need. Are you implying that Canadian workers would actually benefit from hurting American workers?
So American farmers have already been complaining. If you remember on February 1st, when Trump was the most clear about saying, I will impose 25% tariffs across the board on Canada, the next day, the American Farm Bureau, which is a really important Trump constituency, came out and said, Mr. President, we do not support these tariffs because more than 80% of the potash we need, which is a critical input for American farmers, comes from Canada. So American farmers themselves were pointing out to President Trump, your tariffs on Canada are a tax on us. And I think it is a very good thing for American farmers to be pointing out that reality to the president. I've spent a lot of time on U.S. media helping to draw attention of Americans to the fact that these tariffs are a self-mutilating act. The Wall Street Journal has called this the dumbest trade war in history, and the Wall Street Journal is usually a Trump-supporting newspaper. So part of our job here is to help Americans understand how they are inflicting an injury on themselves. And the sooner they understand it, the sooner the president will back down.
Follow up? Okay.
Bonjour, Lise Denis, Le Droit.
Bonjour.
Allez-vous réduire le nombre de postes dans la fonction publique?
Will you reduce the number of positions in the civil service, and by how many? Answer?
Je pense
yes.
que on doit
I think that we need to use technologies such as artificial intelligence, but we need to use those technologies in a practical fashion, in a way that will not reduce services to Canadians. We do need to make cuts to public service positions, and I've already published budgets and a plan for that. I would also like to add that in doing that, we will achieve savings that will then allow us to deliver goods to citizens, and that's the most important thing. Question?
Karina Gould a dit tout à l'heure,
Karina Gould said just a few minutes ago that some of the candidates in the leadership race have been borrowing ideas from Pierre Poilievre. Do you feel that you are a target of that comment? And do you think that that attack is justified? Answer: I am my own person. And as I just talked about during the debate, this campaign for the Liberal leadership is a personal liberation for me. It's really allowing me to share with Canadians what I really think and what my true ideas are, my personal ideas. I'm a true and proud Liberal. The Liberal Party has always been the party that has understood that we can and we must build a strong economy that has jobs, investments, and good wages. And at the same time that we can and must build a strong social safety net. That has always been the position of the Liberal Party. And I think it's a really serious mistake for Liberals to do away with that idea of building a strong economy and giving it over to another party. Because our party has been a party that has always understood that we need to do both at the same time. But there's a very, very clear difference between myself and Pierre Poilievre. Well, there are several, actually. But I will focus on just one. And that difference is that I am the person who knows how to defend Canada against President Trump. The person who knows how to fight against President Trump and fight for Canada. Pierre Poilievre does not know how to do that. Pierre Poilievre agrees with President Trump. Both of them have been saying that Canada is broken. Pierre Poilievre wants to become Trump, a little maple syrup Trump. He doesn't want to be the person who will fight back against Trump. And I've already demonstrated that I am the person who knows how to do that. And all the experience in my life and the work that I have done against President Trump in his first term, the work that I did defending Ukraine against President Putin, and my work as a journalist when I fought about the fight for democracy and against dictatorships, when I wrote about oligarchs and plutocrats, and nothing to do with authoritarian politics. All of that, in addition to the links that I have created as the Minister of Foreign Affairs with our Democratic allies. All that has allowed me and prepared me to be the leader of the Liberal Party today and the Prime Minister of Canada. Follow-up? Like at the French debate, you agreed on a number of issues this evening during the English debate with Mr. Carney. However, he's your main rival in this race.
confortable avec ce ton-là où
Are
vous
you
avez
comfortable
quand
with
même
that tone?
dit être d'accord avec lui et est-ce que vous avez
Having
réussi
said that you agreed with him?
à vous distancier de lui?
And do you think that you've succeeded in distancing yourself from him?
Je pense
Answer, I don't agree with you, actually. I think that there was a clear contrast between the two of us. I think that I demonstrated how I am the strongest person to take action against President Trump. I think that I demonstrated that I understand very well that we cannot change President Trump, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't negotiate with him. And I talked about my plan to win against President Trump. And I did also say that we spoke about the defense of our national security. And I also said that it's important for us not to take a technocratic approach, an approach of a civil servant. We need to understand that today we are facing an existential threat. And that is why we need to take an approach that is adequate for this critical moment in Canada's
That's all the
time.
time we have today.
No, I've been very clear, and I've been clear in my budgets and fiscal statements that I do think we need to have a carefully managed decline in the number of public servants using natural attrition, using technologies, and that is how we can afford to provide Canadians with the affordability measures that they need.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, merci beaucoup.
All right, that's former Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. We've got just one candidate left to take the microphone, and that is former Bank of Canada and Bank of England Governor Mark Carney. Michael Couture is there listening in. Our panel is still standing by. I hope we're going to have time to get with them. They've been patient over the last hour or so. Mike, we're just standing by now for Mark Carney. What do you anticipate the big questions are for him?
Yeah, I think whether or not he feels he recovered from yesterday's debacle here at the French debate and how that was that issue with the slip-up over Hamas and whether or not he feels like maybe he has a bit more momentum coming out of this. I was speaking to some of his spinners and they felt very good coming out of this debate tonight, wondering whether or not that gives them that extra push going forward, because certainly overnight they had a post-mortem, they talked about it, they tried to put it in the past and continue to go ahead. I'm hearing the clicking of cameras, so I think Mark Carney is coming to the microphone.
And you are correct. Let's take a listen in.
You
promised your colleagues you would achieve a budget balance, but you seem to have changed the definition of a balanced budget. If we take the classic definition of a balanced budget, that's a good question. If taking that classic definition, would you commit to balancing the budget, and in how many years? Answer? We'll see, because now is the moment to be building the future. And that's why I changed the budget framework. It's about having an operational balance. It's most of the government's spending, including transfers, debt service, and individual transfers. Half of the programs that the government spends money on. But it is the policies of the federal government that are catalysts for private investment in Canada. And now is the time, when we are facing a crisis because of the threats from the U.S., this is a time also of great change in technologies, including artificial intelligence and clean energy. We have a wonderful opportunity here in Canada to invest, and to invest for the future of our country. And a small amount of federal dollars for some of these catalyzers, and we'll see what the amount of capital deficit is. But right now, it's probably about a percentage point of the GDP, not more. Not more at this time. Follow-up? You talked about exception powers or emergency powers for energy projects such as the Keystone XL pipeline. Does that mean that Quebec might have veto rights, for example? Would Quebec have a right to say no? Answer? Absolutely.
As a reminder, we're going to take one question per journalist. Thank you. Une question par journaliste.
Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News. Why is it that you can make time to fill out your security clearance papers, but won't proactively disclose your corporate interests?
Because I received those security papers as part of this process for the leadership debate. The real question is, why can I fill out my security papers in the course of 2 weeks, arrange for an interview, have a police background check, be in a position to get my security clearance, and Pierre Poilievre, after 3 years, can't do any of those things, at a time when we know there's foreign interference in our democracy and our country is under threat. And I'll say one other thing. I've had security clearance in the past. I've had Five Eyes security clearance in the past. This is important information. And the idea that you could lead a major political party in this country, let alone think you could be prime minister without having access to this information, it's absolutely irresponsible. That's the question.
But then why won't you proactively disclose your corporate assets?
I'm in the middle of a leadership campaign. I will be subject to all the conflict of interest rules and the ethics rules. I will happily comply with all of them. It's a straightforward process. That will begin as soon as this process ends, if I'm selected as leader of the Liberal Party.
Next question, please. Question, question.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Brian Platt with Bloomberg. You've talked in general about your budget and approach, but you haven't gotten into very many specifics. When you talk about a tax cut, how are you approaching taxes? How do you want to cut? Are you talking about an income tax cut? And if so, how broad?
Yeah, okay. So, Brian, thank you for the question. There's several aspects. Some that we've been very specific about, others which we will be specific about in the coming weeks. Where have we been specific? We've been specific that we're eliminating the consumer carbon tax. We're taking a variety of other measures around that. And one of those measures that is related to, but not exclusively related to that, because it's a broader aspect, is a middle-class tax cut that will more than make up for the loss of the rebate that Canadians receive. So maybe just to be clearer than maybe it was on the stage in that debate, those numbers vary by province. The national average is about $800 for a family of four, not a different number that was mentioned. But more broadly, we'll calibrate middle-class tax cut so that it is at least making up for that. It's an important aspect. We will also, I've been very clear, that we will reverse this increase in the capital gains tax that the government put in place. This is a crucial point for two reasons. One, obviously it has a tax impact for those who have put money at risk to build this country, to build businesses, build this country. This is a time to build. This is a crucial aspect of our economy. We have an opportunity to build millions of homes, an opportunity to become an energy superpower in both conventional and clean energy, an opportunity, again, we're here in Montreal, one of the centers of artificial intelligence, an opportunity to take our leadership forward on that. And half of the debate was the discussion of how we react to the Americans and how we protect us for the future. Well, part of that is we need to catalyze, and it went to the first question as well, we need to catalyze enormous private investment. The great news is we can do it, but we need bold policies in order to do that. We need big changes to economic policies. These are big, big changes, both in terms of how we manage the budget and how we're going to change the tax system, role of government, and who our trading partners are going to be. But these are big changes that are really, really going to deliver for Canadians. It's going to allow us not to get up in the morning and look on X or Truth Social and wonder what's coming from south of the border. Thank you.
Next question, please. Prochaine question.
Bonsoir, Frédéric Plante with the Globe and Mail. You were the vice chairman at Brookfield Asset Management prior to
The chair. I was the chair.
Sorry. In the fall, they moved their head office from Toronto to New York. Did you approve of that decision, and what does this say about your commitment to growing Canada's economy and betting on Canada as for now?
Okay. So two things. I'll just correct a few factual things. One, I was chair of Brookfield Asset Management. I ceased to be chair on the 15th, I think, of January when I announced for leadership. Also ceased to be chair of Bloomberg as well. Ceased to be United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. Ceased to be a number of other things. So I resigned all my positions because I am all in for Canada, all in for this leadership, all in during this time of crisis to build our great country, okay? That's the first thing. Second, the decision, the formal decision of the board, happened after I ceased to be on the board. I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management. No longer have a role, obviously, as I resigned in the middle of January. Third thing I'd note, though, is that Brookfield has several companies that represent about 10% of the Toronto Stock Exchange. It is one of the biggest investors in this country. It is one of the biggest investors in the world. And it shows the ability of this country to build. We need more of that building here in Canada, but we need government policy in clear direction in order to do that. And that's the direction that I can bring to build Canada for the future. And it is not the direction that someone like Pierre Poilievre takes his marching orders from Donald Trump, his attack lines from the MAGA world can bring that level of investment to our country. Thank you.
Dernière question, last question, Christian Noël.
Bonjour, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada.
Question.
Pour équilibrer un budget,
to balance the budget, there needs to be compressions. Do you think you'll have to make cuts somewhere? Answer, not cuts in the public service, number one. Two, not cuts of transfers to provinces. And no cuts to individuals, but a strong increase in productivity and government programs. It has been a long time that the government has been focusing on results and outcomes, and my government will do that.
Can I in English?
We're out of time. Oh, in English, yes, in English.
I'm allowed to answer in English. Sorry, they're strict on the. My apologies. They're strict on the time for things to be equal, but for the English translation. Question was cuts in the budget or to balance the budget, the operational budget, how would we do it? Would there be cuts? En effet, right. No cuts to public service, no cuts to transfers to provinces, no cuts to individuals, okay, absolutely clear. Focus on broader program spending, which is a subset of the overall budget. One of the advantages I can count. I know how the budget works. I've worked on budgets over the years. It's a subset of the budget with a focus immediately on increasing the productivity of those programs. For too long, the focus of governments here has been about inputs, in other words, dollars spent. You often hear about programs, and the answer is X $100 million spent or Y billion spent, not about what the objective is. We have to manage towards those objectives. And I'll add one other thing just from the debate, and thank you all, by the way, for coming and watching the debate and following all these issues. It's hugely important. I thought Mr. Baylis made a number of important points in this regard. He and I both see an ability to bring technology and others in order to multiply the impact. And this is crucially important. We need a government that cuts ribbons more than makes announcements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, merci.
All right, that is the final candidate
everyone.
to take the microphone. Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor. My colleague Michael Couture was listening in there. Mike, I'm getting a number of messages, and I could be wrong, but saying that answer on Brookfield, which is, of course, a criticism that the opposition has levied against Mr. Carney that he chaired, as he corrected, chaired Brookfield when it was deciding to move from Canada to the U.S. He says it happened after he ultimately resigned his post, but I'm seeing reports from November of the fall. So that'll certainly be something to look forward to tomorrow. Your thoughts in this last minute or so of how those scrums and ultimately the debate went for the candidates?
Yeah, I think Mark Carney trying to finish on a strong note there. They're definitely trying to carry any kind of momentum into the last 12 days or so here. But I think in closing, one has to think that the person who came out with the most jabs, Karina Gould, may have been the person that stood out the most, because otherwise it was everybody just basically agreeing with each other in different shades of red, you know, that kind of liberal red, as opposed to really trying to stand out tonight. So I think if anybody was scoring this at home, you'd have to think that if there's one name that you remembered out of this, is probably Karina Gould, and she'll be very happy with that. I think Frank Baylis also made a pretty good showing, in considering that he has some different ideas, trying to stand out as the outsider here. But if you look at the numbers, you look at that polls, as I put to Karina Gould, right now it's a two-person race. That is Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney as we go towards March 9th. Vassy.
Okay, thanks so much for your reporting tonight, Mike. Really appreciate it. That's our senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture, in Montreal at the scene of the Liberal leadership debate. Tonight was the second and final one. It was the English language debate. Last night, the French debate took place. Tomorrow, in fact, voting gets underway, and it will culminate, as Mike referenced, on March the 9th. That's when the announcement will be made here in Ottawa as to who has won the contest. That person ultimately becomes the Prime Minister. They'll be sworn in likely a few days after that. And then the big question becomes, at what point do they decide to go to an election? And there have been some early indications, for example, if Mark Carney is ultimately successful in replacing Justin Trudeau, that he would be open to going earlier rather than later. Of course, the fixed election date is in October, but the speculation is very wide and very ripe right now that the Liberals will go sooner rather than later to a more general election. We'll have coverage of all of it, of course, right here on CTV News Channel. I appreciate you sharing your time with us tonight for our special coverage of the Liberal leadership debate. I'll leave our program there. CTV National News with Omar.
Tonight, the final four-way face-off in the fight to become Prime Minister.